The Sexual Offense Treatment Board meeting is convening at 9:03 a.m. on November 14th, 2025. This meeting is being held in person and through Microsoft Teams video conference and is being recorded. The recording will be posted to the internet for public viewing. I will now call roll. Devin Vaughn, chairperson here. Shannon Rose, vice chairperson.
Good morning here.
Brittany Renicky.
Here.
Karen Cox.
Here.
Robbie English.
Here.
Don Thomas. Here. Karen Ledoux.
Here.
Members, when you wish to speak, please state your last name for the record. Board members are asked not to use the chat feature during meetings. The Health Licensing Office, HLO, asks that individuals attending through MS Teams keep their phones muted and cameras off during the entire meeting or until they are given the opportunity to comment during the public and interested parties feedback period, if indicated on the agenda. Public comment is limited to matters listed on the meeting agenda or topics relevant to what this board has statutory authority to regulate. Public members wishing to speak, please sign in on the roster sheet available in the room or email Josh Page at josh.page@oha.oregon.gov and provide your first and last name. Everyone is asked to use appropriate language, manners, and protocols when conducting board business.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Bob Waffle. I'm the Director of the Health Licensing Office. Welcome to those of you that decided to join us in person. Very refreshing, and good morning to those of you, the board members online. First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. So if I can have board members review the agenda and one make a motion to approve it and a second, and the chair will do a roll call.
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
And you are?
Robbie English.
Thank you, Robbie. And a second from somebody, please.
Second, John Thomas.
Thank you.
I'll take a roll call. Devin Vaughn, chairperson here. Shannon Rose, vice chairperson.
Aye or nay?
Sorry. Aye.
Thank you.
Shannon Rose, vice chairperson.
Aye.
Brittany Renicky.
Aye.
Karen Cox.
Aye.
Robbie English.
Aye.
John Thomas.
Aye.
Karen Ledoux.
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you very much. This is Bob again. And the next item on the agenda is approval of the 2026 meeting dates. So board members can pull out their phone or calendar, or if you've not already done it. The next meeting dates we're looking at are May 8th, 2026 at 9 a.m. and November 13th. 9 a.m. In 2026. I've got other things over here on my screen flashing, sorry, and I can't turn them off. So let me reiterate, for the 2026 meeting dates, we're looking at 9 a.m. on May 8th and 9 a.m. on November 13th.
Those work. We would need a motion, a second, and a roll call.
This is John. I would like to propose that the May date be bumped to the 15th because Friday the 8th is the Friday of the SOTB conference.
Or we don't have anything.
We don't have anything on May 15th.
Let me double check.
Would you please? We don't have anything on the office calendar. Okay, thank you.
Wide open.
Fantastic. So it's been proposed that we offer May 15th in lieu of May 8th, November 13th. If those are acceptable, need a motion, a second, and a roll call.
I move that we set the 2026 date for May 15th and November 13th.
And your last name, please?
Thomas.
Brittany Renicky, I second that.
Okay, I'll do a roll call. Devin Vaughn, chairperson. Aye. Shannon Rose, vice chairperson.
Aye.
Brittany Renicky.
Aye.
Karen Cox.
Aye.
Robbie English.
Aye.
John Thomas.
Aye.
Karen Ledoux.
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you very much. This is Bob again. The next item on the agenda is the nomination and vote for chair and vice chair. Currently Devin Vaughn is the chairperson and Shannon Rose is the vice chairperson. The current board member roster, I'll read it off real quick. Devin Vaughn's in a first term, which expires 10/26/27, and Devin can reappoint. John Thomas is in a first term. It expires July 26/2026 and can reappoint. Robbie English is in a first term, and it expires 7/31/27 and can reappoint. Shannon Rose, the vice chair, is in a first term. It expires 8/31/27 and can reappoint. And Karen Ledoux is in a first term. It expires 12/19/27 and can reappoint. Brittany Renicky is in a first term, expires June 30, 2028. Can reappoint. And Karen Cox is in a first term, expiring September 30, 2028, and can reappoint. Any discussion? Anybody can make a nomination? It's open to the board. Or you can leave it the same. Well, we'll need a motion either way.
This is Devin Vaughn. I'm fine and feel great being in this current role or continuing in the current role, if that's what the board wants. I do sometimes watch what I need to read, but
That's not a disqualifier.
I think I'm working on it.
No, we're here to help.
This is John Thomas. Shannon, what is your position on your position?
Hi, thanks, John. I am also fine to reappoint. If somebody really wants the role, that's okay too, but fine to continue.
I would like to move, this is John Thomas. I would like to move that we maintain the Devin Vaughn as chair and Shannon Rose as vice chair.
Robbie English, I'd like to second that.
I'll do a roll call on that. Do I vote? Devin Vaughn, chairperson. Aye. Shannon Rose, vice chairperson.
Aye.
Brittany Renicky.
Aye.
Karen Cox.
Aye.
Robbie English.
Aye.
John Thomas.
Aye.
Karen Ledoux.
Aye.
Okay, congratulations and thank you. Okay, moving on, we move into the director's reports. I'd already mentioned the board member standings. I would just like to remind, see, watching is what we do. To remind board members that there is some training annually. Overview of board and commissions and information security training foundations, as well as preventing discrimination and harassment. There's an optional one for the overview of organ ethics, and there are links on the documentation that is posted to our website under the board. That'll take you to those trainings.
This is John Thomas. Will these things be added as trainings on our Workday account?
I believe you end up going through Workday. As you click on it, it takes you to the training and it updates it. Okay, when you go to your transcripts into the Workday, it'll show it. Any other questions from anybody online? Okay. Moving on into the report. For those of you who are following online, I'm on slide 15. So for the certified sexual offense therapist, a license is issued. We had 3 licenses issued in fiscal year 2026, and that began July 1. And we're currently in quarter 2, and we've not had any. For the certified associate sexual offense therapists in quarter 2, we've issued 1. For the certified secondary clinical therapists, we have not issued any in fiscal year 2026 to date. Certified sexual offense therapist interns, we've issued 4 in quarter 1 and 1 in quarter 2 so far. Licenses renewed, In this current fiscal year, we've had a total of 16 renewals. The majority of those are on paper. Excuse me, online. I apologize. Next, we have the renewals for the certified associate sexual offense therapists. And we've had a total of 3 renew. Moving on to slide 21, the certified secondary clinical sexual offense therapists. We've had 1 renew in fiscal year 2026. And for the intern, we have had a total of 4. Licenses by age and gender on slide 23. You can see that this looks like it is an up and coming profession. And it's in the ages of 34 and 41. We have our bulk. Licensing trends. We have some peaks and valleys. We are currently in a valley for Q2 of 2026 on an average for the clinical therapists. We averaging 67. For the associate therapist, we are averaging 22, and this is as of Q2 2026. For the secondary, we are averaging 11. And for the intern, we're averaging 21.5. And that looks like it's the only one that's kind of had a growth so far. Financials on slide 28, we had a beginning cash balance of 47,541, revenues of 9,450, expenditures of 2,804, and a net operations of 6,646 with an ending cash balance of 54,188. And that concludes the director's report. If anybody has any questions on any of the slides.
This is Devin Vaughn. Question would be, previously I've asked this question, but I'm just on the last financial report. Is there any conversation that can be had, or is there any thinking about the licensing fee? Which again, I want to compare to the LPC, the professional counselors and social work fees that are less than every other year. And these are yearly. And the reason I bring this up, it being one of those kind of barrier points that we hear about from people that are getting into our field or even maintaining their license. It becomes a barrier to have that fee be such in addition to the CEUs continuing ed that needs to be sought out. So I know that has been, that conversation previously has been kind of around, building up SOTB's funding as it came from, there's some big, legal things that have happened in the past, and it's a newer board. So I'm wondering if now is the time to consider that. Again, with my main intent of that being lessening the burden for people that are wanting to be in this field, it being a barrier.
No, I understand. So looking at your cash balances, it would take, so when we always go to what would happen if we had a case that ended up in a hearing. DOJ's fees have increased 28%, so it's approximately $351 per hour. And just the prep fee alone would pretty much eat through this balance that you have. And what we need to do is keep the board solvent, right? So your balances are pretty low, but your expenditures are also low. And if we bring them any lower, it would not take much of anything to get the board into the negative. And once a board goes into the negative balance, it is a constant strain to get them above and beyond to a point of comfort. So we have some boards that, well, stress that we don't want to be the bank for SOTB, right? For the board. We have some boards that are about $500,000 in the black, which is a comfortable spot. Because again, DOJ, in any case that goes to a hearing could eat up $100,000. So I'm at this point wouldn't be comfortable in any additional discounts. So we need to stay status quo and just continue to watch our expenditures and continue collecting the revenue until we're at a comfortable spot. The board HLO as a whole is other funded, which means we get no general funds. I can't speak for any other board because I don't know their makeup and what pays their bills. But we're the rent, staffing, supplies, electricity, computers, everything comes out of all the board's budgets. And depending on the number of the board membership, licensees, is how up in Portland, they calculate what percentage the board pays to keep HLO running and keep the board solvent and allow us to have things, get DOJ advice, keep the lights on, have you here, supply you Keurig coffee pots.
Yeah, I think, oh, sorry, can I just, real quick, I mean, I think, yeah, that makes sense. I'm understanding, I think that some of the constraint, and maybe some of the others can weigh in, but if it's appropriate, in our world, a lot of what we do is just problem solving. So, both with what I think is going to be discussed later as an agenda item with the 48.6 and just, in the world that we're in, what we're hearing is that very real barrier to entry with a field that's already very, very difficult. And so the fees and kind of a little bit of the administrative lift of the SOTB and being part of it is a real thing that we've heard, that's come up often. So if there's no movement possible and that's a barrier, I mean, that's maybe the board is the question of like, is there anything that we can do? Is there anything that the HLO could suggest as far as, I know that outside of with connection with the Oregon Health Authority, is there anything that can, again, because I really feel like that, this is a heavy gate and it's a gate, this gate of this board is so important and we all believe that, but it's also a really heavy gate to get into, one of which is that financial piece. So I don't know, I'm not the type that, okay, so we can't lessen maybe the fee at this point, but what can we do? I mean, is there anything?
Well, man,
Go ahead.
okay, for the record, this is Ann Thompson. In order to get to the cushion, part of it is not spending. We all know the person who makes a good living and they're constantly broke because they can't stop spending, right? One of the things we've struggled with this board, past membership, is constantly asking for legal advice. One of your first meetings, Devin, if I'm not mistaken, we had 4 pieces that were handled by different attorneys, some of which took 2 years to do at $300 an hour. So part of what the board can do is be very discreet when it comes to asking for legal advice. I mean, we had a member, not on the board anymore, who wanted basic vocabulary words legally researched. That's a really expensive look into Merriam-Webster's. Okay, so just be aware also of expenditures. We can't go every other year with a license because everything that we operate under is annual. Everything has to match, right? So the big part of getting the cushion that we need in order to keep you guys safe, because I've been here over 10 years, you just came out of the red. You operated in it because of one bad case, right? So not just what can we do to help others? Because I mean, this is a profession where you need to already have another mental health license. So there's a dual licensure, there's going to be a burden there anyway. And a heavy educational burden just to get you to the place where you can spend that much, right? Be very, very discreet when you want something that's going to require the DOJ, because there's no bigger drain in the tub than that.
Yeah, and I'll just this is Bob. I'll just add that we're pretty liberal with getting DOJ advice. I mean,
When it's
I'm not an attorney, Ann's not an attorney, Travis is not an attorney, most are attorneys. None of us are in your field. You know, what we do is manage the board, the HLO, and as well as be a professional at that, and the other professionals are the investigators, the regulatory folks, right? So, yeah, we have a broad base of knowledge and probably can get some questions answered. But if we're looking for definitions, meaning behind legislative
Can we
information.
do X? Can we do Y?
Yeah, we were always gonna defer to DOJ because we don't wanna put the board, any board on a path in
Yeah.
the wrong direction.
And risk.
So, we're pretty liberal with it, but,
We just urge caution.
but yeah, we're gonna, especially this day and age, the current increase with DOJ fees, the money's in the state. I'm really scrutinizing everything that, where we spend the money, except for the lights.
Hard to work without those. So just, you know, it's not just what comes in, it's what goes out.
So I don't. One more point, John, if I can. So I don't know what any associations or anybody can do on their own to support people wanting to come into the field. So, I mean, there might be other avenues, but unfortunately, it's not HLO to lower the fees, at least not yet.
If we reach a certain point, one of the things we do have, and I think we've mentioned it before, is we have a discretionary discount. And if you're going to increase fees, you imagine the emotion with that, right? Nobody wants to pay another dollar. There's a whole process for that. If you want to raise fees, you have to go to the legislature, you have to fill out this whole thing that says, why, is there any other way? But if you reach a certain cushion, again, as Bob said, we don't want to be the bank of the SOTB, so we can offer like a discount for renewing online, which is great for you guys. It's great for us because the staff and the paperwork and everything is less. So if you get to a certain point where we'll ask our fiscal analysts, can you look over the horizon? With the number of people coming into the field, with average expenditures, is this something we can offer and stay in the black? Because we want to keep the revenue and the expenditures pretty close. That's something that they can study, forecast, work with all the numbers experts and come up with. And that's something that we can offer whenever we reach the point where our fiscal analysts say, you guys are solvent, we can do this. So that is something that we can offer through rule, but we're just kind of not there yet, if that makes sense to you guys. I saw a thought bubble.
Oh, I just have, a question. Of course, Brandon, can you just clarifying question? You guys talk about being in a comfortable spot or when we get there. What would be considered a comfortable spot? Like, what is the long-term goal we're kind of looking at? Because it seems like it'll be another 10 years.
Well, it'll be some time for sure. This is Bob. I'm thinking probably $500,000. And that's only because DOJ could just be a runaway money train. If we're valley cases, I mean, we can put the best solid case together, present it, issue a notice on an individual, and they have every right in the world to take us to a hearing. And then the dollar signs just start rolling, that train gets moving, and we use DOJ to enforce our decision to whatever civil penalty or whatever action we take on a licensing for a violation.
So it's a calculation that we make with and it depends on the board, the risk, the possible cases. And what Bob hasn't mentioned is we're the government, you can appeal anything, right? If you don't like what the administrative law judge has to say at hearing, you can appeal it and appeal it all the way to the Oregon Supreme Court. And this board has had a case go that far. And the we might prevail, we do, but we can only recoup $5,000 from the individual in legal fees. A $5,000 doesn't buy a lunch in the legal world, right? And that's why we try to make sure we have something, because we could prevail. Very likely we will, but we can't get that money back and we're spending every step of the way. So we're just wondering, we would ask the experts how much it would take with your boards and the risk for what the cushion would be.
This is John. First of all, as my position as the sex offense treatment coordinator for the youth authority, I supervise 8 of these licensees. And my name is on it, is their supervisor, is their licensing, their certification supervisor. 2 things. Well, and by the way, I do want to be remiss. Michael Brennan is a tremendous help.
Is he
And
great?
I wonder sometimes if he rolls his eyes when he sees my name pop up on his email inbox. But because he's been a tremendous support in helping me find the appropriate licensure and make sure that we're hitting the mark for getting a sex offense treatment therapist at one of the OIA facilities certified. But that being said, is, 2 things and this is where I come off of where Devin's barrier is. My proposal would be a tiered fee system, so the interns don't pay as much as the clinicals. And so that would be one proposal I would like to see. And another thing is one barrier that I encountered, and it wasn't so much a barrier for us because we're taking OIA funding and shifting it over to SOTB funding, is because the youth authority is paying for the certification of these people.
Oh, okay.
And so that's where the renewal comes out of, is my anyway, that's where it comes from, is it's just moving from one state pot of money to another. And I have 2 people, one that I was getting recertified. She took some time away from the youth authority as a certified associate. And then she came back to the agency and we were renewing her certification. But what I didn't know, and thanks to Michael, is inside of a 3-year window, if you're reinstating your certification, you have to pay $325 a year back, plus late fees. And so this one person costs the youth authority almost $800 for her certification. And then she's going to be renewing this month again. So twice this year, we're paying a lot of money for this intern. But then I've got another person that she's outside the 3-year window. So she's just going to put in a new application for certification.
She's got to reapply.
But it's outside that 3-year window. Let's get rid of the 3-year thing. That way, because people take time away from being, if people take time away from being a sex offense therapist and they come back, they shouldn't have to pay $800 to renew and reinstate their certification. Because if it wasn't for the youth authority, she would not have reinstated.
I think that the 3-year window is in statutes.
Can I give a little background on that?
Go ahead.
That whole 3-year window
Yeah,
thing?
Travis has been here longer than.
I've been here a long time, so, that does kind of from your perspective with this particular person, that seems kind of like, what the heck? Why are we doing this, but a lot of that 3-year window and a lot of that time, it's all kind of standardization from other boards as well. Yeah, so all boards are like that. So we actually have a statute about what the definition of active, inactive, and expired is. Active means your license is active. It's before your expiration date or your active through date, technically what we call it. And then for 3 years, you're inactive. So after that date, you go inactive. You're inactive for 3 years. And what that inactive period means is that your license is inactive, you can't practice, but you're not expired. You're basically kind of in this time frame where we're kind of assuming that you're still practicing. So like a cosmetologist, for example, or somebody like that, they may be taking time off, or they may just not have renewed their license, or a sex offender therapist may have just not renewed their license or continuing to work. So they're like, oh, well, for that 3-year period, you can just come back and renew your license. No problem, no foul. You just have to pay your licensing fees and pay your late fees. Once you go expired, we're assuming that you haven't practiced for a while. And we're going, okay, now you haven't practiced for a while. We want to re-qualify you. In the case of your board, that may just be an application and a looking over it at your credentials and saying that's fine. In the case of, say, a cosmetologist, they may have to go back to school and take a practical exam and then come back and take exams here, written exams at the office to get their license back, because they almost have to restart. They don't have to
No, they
redo
do.
they don't have to redo their education, but they do have to
To reprove
all
themselves.
of their exams. So you're kind of caught up in this big machine that kind of treats all these licenses the same. And the statute treats all of these, what we call authorizations to practice, because there's licenses, registrations, certifications. We have all kinds of different names across the boards. So you kind of are in this big pool of this is how this standardization works. And usually it works fine because a lot of times people, they're just, you know, oftentimes people are going inactive and they're still working. They just forgot to renew their license, or they moved and didn't get
They
the
got
renewal
busy.
bonus, or things like that. But it is a legitimate point that there are people that stop working on purpose and, I guess whether or not they have to pay for a late fee and their back licensing, if that's fair or not, that's something that, unfortunately kind of gets put in the big pile of all the other things. So it's not something that we have a mechanism to say, for you to declare, I'm not working, I'm not renewing my license on purpose, versus somebody who's like, I'm working and I just forgot to renew my license, or didn't have the money to renew my license, or whatever reason somebody doesn't have for renewing their license, but continuing to work. So it's kind of how that all falls into context of the greater HLO picture. So that would be something we would have to address if we were going to deal with that issue that you're talking about.
This is Brittany Renicky. I'm just trying to sit here and like formulate questions. I might need people's help, but kind of if we're talking about like needing to make more so that we can decrease funds, but then Devin's point that it's expensive for a lot of people in entering the field, and it's sometimes a barrier for people wanting to be in this field. It seems like there has been a loophole though that people have found. And John, you can speak to this because we've had conversations about this. But people are practicing like under people's license. So then there's a certain group of therapists that are practicing, but they're not paying for any certification because they're practicing under their supervisor's license. Does that make sense? So then it's like that, then it feels like that takes away from the heart of like the whole certification. Because there's some people that aren't even paying for the certification because somewhere it states, John, you can help me with this, but that certain organizations or can practice under their supervisor's license.
You're not talking about the SPOT, you're not talking about SOTB specific, are you?
Yes,
Now, there's certain organizations that are exempt.
Yes.
exempt.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
And that's a statutory exemption. That would take, if you want to get rid of that, that would take legislation. Sorry, Bob.
That's fine. That's your.
Yeah, the exemptions,
So pastoral and
Pastoral.
government agency.
yeah,
and county.
it's as a student
Yeah.
enrolled in approved educational program. A person employed by a local, state, or federal government agency, community mental health program, or drug and alcohol treatment program licensed or certified in Oregon, if the person's activities and services are performed and provided within the person's scope of employment, and a person who's a recognized member of the clergy, if the person is acting in their capacity as a member of the clergy. So those are all exemptions. If you are under any of those, you don't need a certification to do the work.
And this is John, and that's one of the things that's been kind of, since I've joined this board, that's what been the things that bothered me. Is there are people out there that are using that loophole and delivering services with no oversight whatsoever, and being, and in my experience, kind of arrogant about it. And then here I am working in a position with the youth authority, and technically all my eight staff that I supervise technically don't need this certification because we work for a state agency. But we're doing it because it's what's right for delivery of sex offense treatment to adjudicated youth. And we'd love to see that piece of the legislation stricken.
Okay, that's where your associations come in.
Exactly.
Yeah, our job is to follow statutes. If you want to change those, that would take an association or an individual, not as a board member, but I see Shannon, your hands up. But as an individual, a practitioner, And you would put a concept forward, get a legislator to carry that for you, and that would help, how that go about
And
changing.
that is, John, that's something that we're working on with OSO, is to try and.
Yeah, as long as we're not accidentally having a board.
No, we're very, because three of us.
Okay, okay,
Okay.
I just want to make,
And
just
so we always make sure
trying to
that,
keep you safe.
yeah, we make sure who's in the room.
Awesome. Shannon, I'm sorry, did you have any questions?
Sorry, no questions. I just wanted to uplift and give my support for what John is saying. I think that that piece that was read is very problematic, particularly when we have a lot of individuals abused by clergy who come forward. And so there are some sort of conflicts of interest that happen there that are, I think, really important to sort out. So I just wanted to sort of second and chime in that I was listening and supportive of the conversation happening in the room.
Sure.
This is Doug Vaughn. Anne, would you be able to give background of like, well, I'm interested in like, why did that carve out, those exemptions come into play? I'm assuming that was a board conversation in the beginning. No.
No, well, way back when the board was created, I think 08 or something, 09, language was developed outside of, the board didn't even exist.
Mhm.
An association, might have been OAPSA, I'm not sure, just created some language and got the legislators to carry it. And they even had this really unusual, the old statute had this really unusual, as it is recognized that this population needs certain services. They had an introduction to the statute. It's really interesting that special providers are needed and, So they came up with language, created the board, the makeup of the board, the license, registration, certification, came up with some criteria. Board was created, they built rules around. Then I'd say 3 times since I've had this board, additional legislation has come forward, changing the titles twice. Changing it from the sex offender treatment board, where you have adjudicated or, convicted sexual offenders, to more of a general offense, people that are outside the pipeline, so to speak. So they broadened out the client base and expanded to create the intern, redid the secondary associate to the secondary clinical. We have the longest titles now, and it did some of that work. Why those exemptions were placed in, we were not privy to that conversation. Don't know why.
It's always been there.
I can go into my giant laterals and get the old book. Would you like me to go get the old book and see if it was still there?
Yeah, but I can say that those probably were not in the original statute for the formation of the board.
Mhm.
Because when the board was first formed, this was a voluntary license.
Mhm.
It wasn't required. And a lot of the
The exemptions come with the requirement.
I was involved in the first group of licensing for this board. And I was a board specialist at the time when this was going on with the board. It was, a lot of it had to do with verifying credentials for the county parole and probation officers. So the parole and probation officers all had their own separate criteria for determining who was allowed to provide sex offender treatment at the time. And it was all part of the probation program. So it all relied heavily on, and then the counties themselves could decide whether or not they wanted to require to only use certified people or licensed people, or if they could continue using unlicensed people. So it was all voluntary at the time. So those exemptions, I don't think that those exemptions existed because it was a voluntary license, and it was really for the counties to be able to more easily vet who was qualified. So they didn't have to go through their own vetting process. And some counties did, some counties didn't. I was actually surprised that some counties, we would have cases later, and some counties were like, yeah, we don't have any available, so we're still using our vetting criteria. So
And yeah, they had the grandfather,
that's right.
the term is legacy now, but they had this grandfather piece
Grandfather.
where there were folks providing services that had no training at all. And part of the legislative changes was to take that small group, I think there were fewer than 12, and say, okay, by this date, you have to either have a mental health license, you have to join a team, right? Like you have to have a mental health license in order to do this work. So it's evolved over time.
Yeah, as it went from voluntary as a credential to assist county parole offices in figuring out who to use for this service into a mandatory license. That's when those exemptions started coming in, because of course, whenever you say something's going to be mandatory, there are interest groups out there or groups of people that have people that now are feeling like their employees
Mhm.
are going to now fall under this mandatory licensure. So they go, okay, well, they go to the legislator and they say, hey, we've got all these employees that may fall under this, may not fall under this, but we don't want
They're gonna boost
we don't
their
want to have to
costs.
try to get all these people licensed because, you know, now that's really complicated and
They're
overloaded
already
stuff.
doing the work.
They're already doing the work. And so those exemptions often get carved out either during the initial bill or during like session where a
The
group.
group comes forward and says this is gonna create an
Exactly,
enormous
yeah.
hardship for us.
Right.
This is gonna affect our business, our ability to provide services. And the legislators go, oh, well, can we write this group out? I mean, that's generally how.
I don't know specifically those, but maybe a little history of what the sport was originally
Yeah.
and how it evolved. It can kind of give you some insight,
Right.
maybe.
Yeah.
You could probably have some idea how those exemptions came.
That's helpful, and that's what I thought, as far as there'd be some special interest groups that would come in and say that thing, but the irony, which is the weird part about this, so I'm thinking this through as we're talking, it's like, on one hand, we're all trying to like, get rid of barriers to entry, get the right people in, so like, accessibility, but like at the crossroads of like a high bar, which is what this board is. So even things like, you know, none of those carve out spots, the clergy, the state agency, or the interns, like those three groups being able to practice our stuff without any accountability to this board is so unethical. And it flies in the face of like our own standards we've adopted the ATSA standards, which specifically talk about that you should not be providing this type of service if you don't have the training to oversight.
Within your competence.
Right, so we've allowed, the statutes are allowing there to be people that don't have to abide by the very things that we're all abiding by, and they don't fall into that. Can you imagine a grad intern with no oversight providing this type of treatment? It's like potentially so damaging. And we see some of that, like in our practice, we have people that come and I was seeing so-and-so and we're just like, oh my gosh, what happened here? Because they didn't have someone who knew what they were doing. It causes harm. So I would say, I would just affirm Osoton and maybe Karen, you and John with OATSA, being able to come together as like a dual board and like being able to like help change this.
Well, on that note, careful of forums.
Yes, of course.
Board
And then,
meetings are triggered by bodies,
Yeah.
even in email, not intent.
Correct.
Just like, you know.
and so it looks like, that carve out came in, looks like it might have been 2017.
Yeah,
Sounds.
That sounds about right.
that sounds right.
I was the Trappist's chair when this all came about. And then with regards to students and all, you can only be a student. I mean, there's some guidelines around the carve out, and you can only be a student for so long. And it doesn't say the student can just go do the work. They've got to be under supervision.
It says engaged in an educational, a student enrolled in an approved educational program who is pursuing a graduate degree
Mhm.
in a mental health field. So,
With no training in any of this stuff, though.
Well-
There's no grad programs that do that.
Yeah, and it also goes on to say the student provides sexual abuse specific treatment services only for academic credit as part of an organized and supervised training program. So they're not to be sent out and just do it.
hang a shingle out and start
Yeah,
providing services.
they've got to be under supervision, some sort of supervision.
So this is John. I do want to make sure in my brain also that we addressed the question about, would it be feasible to do a tiered fee structure for, interns versus clinical. I would like to hear some more about that. But one last little comment I'd like to say about, people under supervision. I think that the supervision, and then I think that sometimes there is, one of the things that concerns me as a licensing supervisor is under the Board of Licensed Social Workers, where I do supervision for licensees. I have to report every 6 months what we're covering and what, that we're, basically the subject of our supervision meetings, how often we're meeting, how many cases we review, stuff like that. That gets reported to the BLSW every 6 months for the 2 people. I am a licensing supervisor for LCSW. It's unfortunate that that doesn't seem to be the case for the SOTB, that I sign on as a licensing supervisor for these people that I work with the youth authority, but there's no oversight to the quality of what we're talking about, what cases are we covering? And so it's up to my own personal integrity. And so I use the same standard for my SOTV licensees as I do for my social work licensees. And that's because that's the way I'm, built. But and this brings back to Brittany's point. There are people out there that I'm sure that sign on as a supervisor that live in Bend and they are supervising somebody who is practicing in Pendleton. And what oversight are they providing that licensee? Are they just out there running renegade, or are they meeting regularly to make sure that there's ongoing education, licensing support, experience, mentorship, that sort of thing? So those are the two things I'd like to, visit is the tiered licensing fee system and some sort of oversight for those who are signed up as supervisors for interns and associates and what was the other one? There's a third one that's short of clinical.
There's the secondary clinical
That's
where
it.
you have everything you need, but you can only see certain number of patients. But you have to have everything and you have to have supervisor, and then everybody except the clinical has to be supervised.
So, this is Bob, I can have the analyst look at, a tiered schedule and see where it will take these numbers. And how dangerously low they may go, I don't know.
Okay.
Then he would just, problem is we don't have a number of people that would come in. We don't know how many people are gonna sign up and get a license.
Right.
Any license. So I can just have him do a forecast and go for and see.
Clarify question?
Of course.
If to keep the board solvent and we tiered this, would you be okay with the clinical having to pay more?
Yes.
Okay,
'Cause
so to give everybody
more
else
is-
relief.
Yeah.
You would be okay if that had to go up to keep it all balanced. Good to know.
Well, this is Devin. I mean, it's back to the numbers of,
Mhm.
I think you made the comment of, or someone made the comment of, it's like, when we say there's a little bit of a youth movement, we're seeing younger, I mean, that, we don't know who would sign up, but I think that's what the field needs. We need these new therapists coming out of grad school, and if that gives them relief or it makes it easier. I can't speak for all the CSOP folks, but it's like, I think we'd all make that change.
So, this is Bob, between the ages of 18 and 33, there's, 19.
Thank
So
you.
19 folks, that have obtained some sort of license.
We might want to check in on online.
Thanks. Any other board members online have any comment, want to join this conversation? Sorry, we're captivated by the folks in front of us.
I would support that as well. And if, I'm coming from the victim services end, so if you all in the treatment end feel that tiered model would work, I 100% would support you all.
Thank you, Shannon.
Yeah, I
This is
mean,
Karen, oh, excuse me.
Go ahead, Karen.
go ahead, yeah.
This is Karen Cox, and I also would support, I think, those of us that are certified or further along in our careers and have the capacity to pay, a higher rate for certification.
Karen Ledoux, you've been awfully quiet. Not to put you in the spotlight.
Well, I guess I'm coming from a parole and probation perspective and representing OACCD. I just feel like, I guess, looking at the history of the licensures and the way that we choose treatment providers is that we do feel it's important to have the licensure. And I would also support the tiered system, being an LPC and having to renew and looking at the interns and just the disparity there. I would also support that a certified therapist also pay more.
Good to know.
I think we do have other programs where a person coming in brand new has a little bit reduced fee, but that results in the people who, that has to be,
Or
it's a balancing act, right? So.
Yeah, our behavior analysis regulatory board, we have behavior analysts. They work in a lot of capacities according to corporate culture and corporate training, but these particular providers work with children on the autism spectrum. And a lot of them are close to doctorate, postdoctorate, and they have assistants, assistant behavior analysts, being less, but need supervision. They're working toward the full certification. And then they have interventionists who are technicians who essentially take their plans and put them into place. Their registration, I mean, they have to be supervised. They can't, they can't operate on their own, is much, much less than what a full behavior analyst pays for certification, because really it's what they earn, their billable hours and access to CPT codes. So that's certainly something we can look into.
If I can,
I've noted it.
this is John. Let me ask a clarifying question based on Ann's earlier statement. So would this require DOJ's weigh in? Am I right? Am I sending, am I including the bill?
Are you talking about the statutory?
Yeah, the fee schedule.
Oh, the fee schedule? No.
Okay, thank you.
I love how you guys internalize things. It's fantastic. No, that's something that we have fiscal experts. We have an analyst in-house. Bob is also a fiscal guy. And we would work with our folks in Portland and in-house say, okay, look at the risk. Every profession has its own risk. Look at how many providers we have, how many, kind of what the average rate of increase is, what it would take to float us, and how to split up the pie. And that is certainly something we can do in
So,
Portland.
yeah, and this is Bob, to add on to that, we can reduce the fee without going through a very long process called Senate Bill 333, which
You have
I
to
do.
justify
the
increases.
justification, it goes, I gotta send it to the folks in Portland, then they send it to DAS, and then it goes to legislature. That sounds familiar. Yeah, so it's difficult, it's more difficult to bring it up and a lot less difficult to bring it down. So, but we can look at it and see where, I can have Kenny just run a bunch of numbers when you
Our
have
analyst
time.
is Kenny Turk.
Yeah,
And he might just, I don't even know if we'd have to do the 333 if we're saying, okay, it's the same amount, we're just moving things around. I don't know. That's a creative solution and we can look into that in-house.
So another thing you said, this is John, another thing you said was, there's a discount, a coupon if you renew online. I've always renewed online. Is there?
Not with this board.
Okay, I'm
This
just-
is Ann. No, what we're saying is we're trying to show you all the tools we have in our
Okay.
toolbox. And when a board is first starting out, and we have to write, and this is just sort of an arc, how it all works. When we get a new board from the legislature or a new program, we just got one for dental boards or dental labs program. And what we'll do is we have to write rules. We have to have rules advisory committees. We have to involve the DOJ to say, okay, how do we make this program work? What do we do? So we are running in the red right from the beginning, right? When you have a new board, you get a new certification, you have to understand how it all works. You run up some bills before you ever start taking in licenses, right? Any kind of fee. And so, once you get up to speed and you get to a certain point, we've had plenty of boards that haven't had a lot of cases. People just renew on time. It's fine. Everything's fine. They start bringing in a little bit more money than they need. If we have a low risk profession like music therapy, Okay, if you get bad music therapy, if the worst thing ever happened with music therapy, if you look at the outcome of that, and I know it sounds funny, but you have to look at the outcome versus our direct entry midwives. Something goes bad with a birth. Okay, there are MDs that don't want to get near that realm because of the risk. Okay, so we have experts who kind of look at the risks and say, okay, the average case might cost this. We haven't had a case in X. This is a good spot to then introduce a discount, and we'll do it in rule. Everything has to be in rule. And you'll see in some of our boards, these aren't even all of them. These are just the ones I oversee. We'll say those who renew online can take $15 off their renewal or $10. And it's just, again, it's something, what can we do that is sustainable? And we can just put that through rule, do a bare minimum public comment, who's gonna complain, and get that in rule right away. But that's not something that, again, we can offer you yet,
Okay.
because you guys are in the black, but you're not deep enough to start offering coupons.
Right, thank you.
Of course, of course. I know we talk about this all the time, and sometimes we forget to give you all the details.
So, and this is John. So then a follow-up to questions of having standards for supervision or, because there are rules in the written, on the website and in the application, what a supervisor needs to do. But it doesn't seem like there's oversight.
Well, you talk about oversight from the board, or from HLO, or oversight for the supervisors?
Right, well, 'cause like I'm saying, this is John, when, with the Board of Licensed Social Workers, my licensee, my associate and I have to submit a report every 6 months of what we've talked about. Are there any concerns? Do I have any concerns about this associate? What's our strengths? You know, there's a 2-page form that I have to fill out and sign, and the associate signs off on it. We submit it to the BLSW. What kind of oversight is there for a supervisor of a sex offense intern?
Can I add something real quick before you answer? For LPCs, they're the same way, MSW, LPC, when they're going towards licensure, it's not just they've completed their hours and then they just qualify for an LPC or an LCSW. There's that piece with, and I don't know on those boards who that's with, if that's the licensing coordinator employed by the board, the LPC board, who also, there's also that piece of competence. So they're getting those, every 6 months, not only the hour tracking, but like what you're saying as a supervisor, strengths and weaknesses, any big areas of concern. And then there's some level of vetting. So it's not just that they completed the hours and then they're just ready to go. There has to be, that's a little piece of their gate to make sure that people don't go in that are not prepared and,
Right.
qualified to do so. So in our world here, we don't have that. When someone is a CASOT and they get enough hours and they get their license and they finally have it, then they can just qualify and they get stamped with the CCSOT. There's no element of like that vetting by the supervisor.
Right, well, this is John, with the LCSW, there's a test, there's the ASWB test as well. So when I get to up to 75 individual hours with an associate, that triggers their ability to take the test to earn their own LCSW. And if they fail it, then supervision continues until they do pass the test. And so it's a very high bar is LPC, do they have a test that they have to take? Okay, so there's a very high bar for these professional licenses.
This is Brittany Renicky, kind of on the same track, when you're becoming a clinical supervisor, you can supervise the LPC too. We have to get a training
Right.
done.
Yeah.
And if, let's just say I became a certified clinical sex offense therapist, there's nothing you don't need any type of training. We're saying anybody can supervise, which I personally wouldn't have felt comfortable supervising somebody if I didn't already have my training hours to become a clinical supervisor for LPC. Like, I feel like those go hand in hand and they're often overlooked.
So I see Tina and Michael online. Michael, can you hear me? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I can hear you.
When you receive applications for this board, what requirements do you receive from them?
Well, I mean, it varies by license type, but as far as supervision goes. It's just basically a sign off that they've done the supervision.
And that they've completed the X number of sessions with specific type of person or clinical hours. Thank you. That I believe is also part of it.
There's the formal training component, but then there's also the supervision, which usually there's just an agreement as to how frequently and what the duration of time will be for the supervision sessions.
Okay. So with that being said, and then as I'm kind of refreshing my memory with the statutes, we don't have in place, and we may not even have statutory authority to have one supervisor tell us this person does not belong in this field, you know, or needs extra training. And that's,
Or they're blowing off supervision meetings or.
yeah, right?
Yeah, that's up to the supervisor to step up. And also the idea was, what I understand, you already have another mental health license.
Yes.
So some of the conversations were around it were, okay, you already have all these obligations to this other license. You're supervising. I know the board in the past asked, can we statutorily approve supervisors? You didn't have the authority to do that.
Yeah.
It was just somebody who, had a certain, certain component, and then they could if they chose to. But it wasn't like the board could approve a supervisor, or just like in the past, you've asked, can we have specific certifications for the population you work with, youth, adults, or both? All your viewers are the same. You don't have that. So if you wanted that additional quality control element, and remember, it's so funny because a board struggle with this. You guys are all A+ players, you wouldn't be here, right? This is what you struggle with. You guys are all best practices. Unfortunately, in the regulatory world, we live with the basenet. Like, you can always do better, but you can't do worse, and we're complaint-based. If there is somebody who is not following the rules, the ethic, we always say rules are for people who don't follow the rules, right? You hear of something going on, something's not working, you can file a complaint, and we will assign an investigator and look at it and see if any of our current laws or rules are broken. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of the quality control pieces that maybe other boards have. We have 20 boards and programs, and so we have things that work for everybody, statutorily. But when we get into quality control, it's either in investigation based, or it's like if somebody gets a really bad haircut and they make a complaint to the Board of Cosmetology, I got a bad haircut. Okay, is it going to grow out? You have to kind of look and say, did they burn you? Did they use a product that was inappropriate? That kind of thing. So if you're looking at quality control, we don't really have a lot of that. You can't break the rule, you can't get below a certain point, but you can always do better. And that's what the regulatory world kind of is. When you talk about public safety, you may only be a B+ player, but did you violate a rule? That's kind of the world we live in.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you have specific standards, that you've adopted.
Ethical standards.
Ethical and practice standards that you've adopted, and those apply as well.
Absolutely.
But, I think that, what Ann is saying is true. Regulation is often about minimum standards versus excellent best practices. But that being said, that doesn't mean that those minimum standards are bad or low or subpar. There is subpar practice, and minimum standards can be very, very high. And I think that the minimum standards are fairly high for this group, because you've adopted a fairly robust,
Standards of practice, professional responsibility.
and you have you have a lot of that kind of stuff
And
in
ethical
here
principles.
baked in.
If
So
you feel someone is violating something like that, let us know and we'll look into it.
yeah,
And we've had cases, come forward.
and
Um,
and supervision programs are, how deep are they scrutinized throughout the process? How much trust do you give the supervisor versus how much oversight do you give the supervisor is a constant struggle with all of our programs that have supervisors involved. And some of them are like a checklist of like, they have pages and pages of checklists that you've done this and you've done this, you've done this, you've logged these hours. Others are, when you're done, the supervisor signs off on a thing saying you've done your 500 hours and here you go.
Come to us and complain because they can't use computerized signatures that just take care of it.
So it runs the gamut, and this is the struggle that all of our boards with supervisors go through. How much oversight versus how much trust versus how much
Access.
what's practical
quality.
versus what's ideal, and it's all a balancing act. So if it's something that, needs to be looked at or addressed, that, we'd have that conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to step over into policy because I'm a regulatory guy, but
And I don't want to speak to the directors because he's the director, so.
And I don't want to be.
We all help each other. We try desperately not to step on each other's toes.
But we're constantly trampling on. each other's
It
toes.
just,
But
it
it's okay.
hurts so bad.
And so the statutes look to me as old as 2007. So.
Yeah, the foundation.
Yeah, so it's not, HLO really tries hard to be neutral. Because we do have the regulatory piece and you're the experts and we facilitate the board and advise the board, and vice versa. So, with what you're saying, the associations might want to get a legislator under their wing and have some conversations. I don't know. I don't know how anybody would do that or what the process actually looks like. The other thing is with regards to training and practice, we don't have it in what that looks like statute with the exception of ATSA. Right? So everybody's got to follow ATSA. And so what you're saying.
When the juvenile standards we adopted.
Yeah, yes, thank you. And with what you're saying, if somebody is not up to par or the supervision isn't there and you're aware of it, that might be something we can handle, but it would go through, we would turn to the ATSA, whatever version of what they feel it should be to assess it. But again, it's like, it's one person's opinion as to another person's actions. So it's opinionated, and I'll tell you from experience, it was very difficult to investigate and to come and say, no, we're not going to give you a license because John said no. They said you're not very good at what you do. And it didn't look like we had authority to extend the training either. So, again, this is a relatively new program. We've got programs that have been here since, I don't know, 1950, 1960, and some of those statutes hadn't been gone through.
Yeah, our hearing aid statutes are from 1954. Not that anything has changed since then.
Yeah, years or years or years.
Well, this is Devin. I appreciate you all talking this through with us, and I appreciate you bringing it up because I just think you're right. We're an idealistic group in wanting, and that's not the right word, but like just wanting there to be really high standards because as with some other boards, where somebody who's not trained or supervised might botch a haircut, we've seen on the ground level when there's not a good provider and someone who's trained and has oversight and real people get hurt. And so,
It's risk.
there's a lot of risk there. And so, I hear you. I get everything that's being said, about the standards and there's a certain level that needs to be able to encompass all of us. And I think that maybe part of it too is it's just a continued understanding that like a lot of us who came to this board and part of what we're hoping happens with the community safety aspect. I think lots of conversations have been helpful about just the board's role and what's not the board's role and really what the shift needs to be in talking these things through with associations and really going the right routes. Because I don't think any of what is being said. My opinion would be, none of what is being said is off, and there needs to be a standard. How and where that goes and how that's enacted and what we do with that, that's more of the question than, I mean, it's clear that like the SOTB has its role and it's not role. So I get that. So I still have to say, just appreciate talking it through and giving some advice on like how to go about that, because I think this thing continues to be something that we think about a lot because we see it. It's
It's
evolving.
evolving and it's changing, and that's something else we'll get to when we talk about the report. But I will say, and we try so hard to be neutral because we have to be Switzerland,
Mhm.
right? We're the hands of the legislature. We're not allowed to have feelings about stuff. You know, we live in the world of laws and rules, right? However, that doesn't mean if an association doesn't get a concept through, which is, you come up with some language. The legislators have been very responsive to the victims, the governor's task force. They've been very open to making the world safer in this area, right? It's not like you want to tax everybody with a red car and you can't find a legislator to hang that on, right? You could get good reception from that. What we do, and what we can do for you, and Bob and I can do it, if you get a concept together. We can, as Switzerland, sit down and say, okay, you've got language that you think is gonna work a certain way, but it might have unintended consequences, because this is a very complicated machine, right? There's buttons, there's levers, there's wheels turning. And if we call them conforming amendments that allow us to issue refunds or renewals or licenses or investigate, subpoena power, all of these little things that we need to have, if they are not given to us, we can't do it, right? Even if it makes sense. So we always say, hey, listen, you get some language together, Switzerland will sit down with your association and say, hey, listen, this might be problematic and this is why. And we can make sure that all the little pieces are there and it's going to work the way you want it to work, right? And we can't have an opinion on what you do with it, but we can test drive your vehicle and make sure the doors will stay on. Okay, so we're happy to do that, and just let us know so we can bring you in here and you can meet with Switzerland. We're happy to have.
Yeah, we can get licensing together to
Yeah.
tell what roadblocks
They
they're gonna
see-
end up with something coming through. Trampus or his group can say, it's gonna be pretty difficult to regulate X, Y, and Z.
Right. You
yes.
get language that's really tough. Like we got one bill through this session that said, in order to get a license, you needed to have the correct attitude. And I'm not making that up. Thank you. That's the kind of stuff that sounds great. People are excited. You gotta have the right attitude to have this license. Who in God's name is gonna legislate that? Right? And so these are the things we look at and we go, whoa, and because we see things differently. And we're happy to say, hey, listen, you do realize this will bring in but you have significant barrier to entry here. You might get better people, better qualified people, but you're gonna have fewer of them with this particular piece of the fence, right? So just bring it to us and we're happy to talk to you about it.
That didn't survive the legislature, did it?
Sure did.
Oh dear, because there was this is John, there were some bills that I was following related to the youth authority that I was really hoping wouldn't see the light of day, and most of them didn't. So.
Well, what's interesting is that particular piece, here's Bob trying not to laugh. That particular piece did go through, did get signed, and then it was a huge bill that involved multiple agencies. I mean, and this is.
Christmas tree bill.
It wasn't quite Christmas tree, it was more of a wreath,
Okay.
but there was a lot there. There was a lot going on. And it involved like DCBS and DHS and OHA and all the acronyms. I don't think the police were involved. And everybody had to do a certain thing. There were unintended consequences with it. Because when we look at bills, and this happens all the time, we say, what do we have to do? What is this going to do to us? But then if it goes through, you look at it on a secondary level and say, okay, we have the what, let's start talking about the how. How are we going to do this, right? And we start unpacking that little Pandora's box. And some of the people that were going to be affected by our part of the bill didn't know anything about it. And they were like, whoa, 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 this is going to have serious repercussions for us. And it was there were enough of those that the proponents kind of pressed pause on it and said, okay, we're gonna try to fix some of the stuff that went through without maybe everybody at the table. So for right now, we're on pause. And so I don't have to decide who's got the right attitude. And I'm really grateful for that right now. It would have ruined the Christmas thing.
Right.
Oh my.
We're hoping, this is Bob, we're hoping we get voted off that island.
Yeah, we're just hanging on to that immunity idol as hard as we can.
Hi, this is Brittany Renicky. I just wanted to make sure I'm understanding it correctly, so I have the right information to take back to our course. So if we as OSOP and OATSA came together and got a legislator and talked about these things and created some kind of concept, we could bring it back to you guys to review the language.
Absolutely.
And help with that.
Absolutely.
Can that be done outside of this meeting or?
It would have to be.
Okay,
Because we here are working within what we have.
okay,
If we're talking about future, Bob and I, or everybody would probably sit in not a board meeting, because it's not board business. It doesn't exist yet. It's association business,
Mhm.
right? And legislative business. And we would just sit down and read it over and make sure, and know that the legislature works so far ahead. People now are already banging on 2027. You know, it's out there. Everyone thinks, 2026 is almost already gone in the rearview mirror. It happens so fast. So if you want something like this, get it going as fast as possible. Legislators used to have limits for how many bills they wanted to introduce. As the kind of young guns have come in, that's loosened a little bit. We had, 5,000 bills this past session?
A lot.
Something like that. Yeah, and so getting an ear and getting a sympathetic legislator and working on that as soon as possible would be great. And you can call us if we're here. We'll sit down and read it with you and give you our opinion.
you'll give me your number.
Oh, yeah, I'll give you
Oh, I'll
my,
give you
happy to. I'll get you, don't leave. I'll
Okay.
get you all business cards and we can just talk offline about it.
I would love that. Thank you.
Of course, we're always happy to help, but again, we're Switzerland. Of course.
Any other questions? Do we want to take a break before we dive into regulatory report? Okay,
Do you want to take 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
let's do 10 minutes. It's 10:20,
We'll be back at 10:30.
10:30.
We'll get business cards.
Thank you.
We,
We muted our recording stop.
recording's on?
Them up there, but we'll make sure they can hear us. We good?
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna do a roll. Devin Vaughn, chairperson here. Shannon Rose, vice chairperson.
Yes, here.
Randy Rennie,
Here?
Karen Cox,
Here.
Bobby English. John Thomas,
Here.
Karen Ledoux.
Here.
And this is Bob. If we can get Trampus, who's here, to begin his regulatory report.
So this is Trampus Shug. I'm the regulatory manager here at the Health Licensing Office, and I'm here now to talk about the regulatory report. So if you're looking at the regulatory report, you're seeing 3 boxes on there. You're seeing the first one that we'll talk about is cases open, close, status. So you see that we have actually 3 bienniums still hanging on this report. The bienniums are 2-year periods. We're currently in the 2027 biennium. We're about 4 months in, I think, to the 2027 biennium. The 2027 biennium started July 1 of 2025. So as you can see, we've had 2 complaints come in, and those 2 complaints were closed. Now, as you can see, the 2025 biennium, we had 5 complaints come in, and the 2023 biennium, we had 7 complaints come in. And so we had 14 complaints showing up on this report. 6 are still in some status of open. I apologize. 2027 complaints are not closed; they are still open. So. So the open cases, like I said, we kind of have to make a distinction somewhere between open and closed. And open can mean various things. It can mean that it's just been open. I've looked at it and freshly seen it and gave it to the administrative staff, and they assigned a complaint. It hasn't done anything with it yet. It can be that it's in the hands of an investigator. It can be that the investigators already looked at it and given it to me and I need to review it. It can mean that I've reviewed it, but the board needs to review it. So opening, it can be that the board reviewed it, they want to do something about it, but we haven't quite done it yet. It's in some legal process. So open is all of those things. Closed is a little more straightforward. Closed means that, we've done all of those things or any of those things that need to be done, and it's been, investigation is closed, say as unfounded or something like that, unsubstantiated, or maybe no jurisdiction, or, in error, or all kinds of different things. Could be that we got 2 complaints on the same person and we closed one and referred it to the other. That doesn't happen as much in this group, but it happens a lot more in other boards, but it does happen. It could also mean that we've made a decision to do something. We've actually sent out the disciplinary document, and now we're in a different world of still kind of dealing with that case, but it's closed as far as the investigation is concerned. I mean, we had to put that line somewhere. So that's kind of where we put it. And so I can say, I don't see any major bumps. It seems pretty smooth. I haven't seen any big jumps in cases. You don't get a lot of investigations. I can say a little bit on put this in a grander perspective of where we are in general with investigations. This particular year has been one of the highest years that I've seen for investigations in a long time. We're well up over 400 investigations and complaints for the whole agency or for the whole office, which is a pretty large increase over last year and an increase over last. The only time we've had any kind of bump is when we had a big bump in like cosmetology during the COVID period. And those were all people complaining that their hairdresser wasn't wearing a mask or something like that.
Place was open.
Yeah, the place was open. It wasn't supposed to be open. Had a lot of referrals from OSHA and things like that around that. But, it's been kind of a slow, and we get more boards and more boards, but something has kind of increased in the last couple of years. I don't know what. And I don't know if it's a trend or if it's just a bump. We never know. And I've been here for 17 years and I've seen lots of trends and lots of bumps. And then they dip back down. So it remains to be seen. That's a bigger picture. You know, this board seems to be pretty steady with the complaints. I can say that, you know, over the last year or so, we've been increasing our capacity a bit. We were down a little bit with investigators during some transitions between Bob and I and investigators and things like that. And we're back up to full staff. Also, another thing that's happened in regulatory for this board is we've actually brought a subject matter expert on board. I got them under contract. So that also helps move investigations that maybe got stalled or, you know, had to go from one investigator to another. So, you know, we don't have any investigations to look at this board meeting, but I anticipate with a little bit, if we have an extra investigator that's come on and with a subject matter expert coming on board, I anticipate we'll probably see some come through over the next board meeting. I see that the next board meeting isn't until May. So if something closes out, I probably won't want to wait until, you know, if it's more than a couple of months, I usually will get together with Ann and Josh and Bob's blessing, get together a meeting just for looking at cases.
Special meeting.
Like a special
boards
meeting.
will just deal with
Yeah.
cases.
So if something comes up in between, if we get something that closes out that needs to be looked at by the board, then we would do that. It's like I said, May is an awfully long way away.
We don't want to make a respondent wait that long.
Yeah, especially some of these cases, a couple of these cases this year, a little bit older. I don't know that they'll play out needing board review, but you know, until all the information is in, you never know. So, and just as a kind of reminder, I don't know that we've done a lot of regulatory stuff with this current board makeup. So, you know, just talk about that just a little bit. So when the cases come in, there's kind of like a initial overlook on them. We have to look and see if we even have jurisdiction, right? Your jurisdiction has widened over the years. So at one time, you had to be adjudicated. You had to be, you know, all these things. And so a lot of things would just get shut off right at review or just very shortly into once we get those questions answered. Things have opened up a little bit, but so your jurisdiction has actually opened up a little bit and widened over the years since I've been doing this. So, but we look at that and I kind of have to apply a reasonable person kind of standard, a reasonable probable cause kind of. So I look at it and I say, okay, if everything in this complaint were to be true. Now, it may not all be true, but let's say everything, I just have to assume everything in here is true. Would this constitute a violation? Or am I not sure? Maybe it would. With this, there's a lot of complexities. Could this constitute a violation? And if that answer is yes, I'm going to move it on to an investigator. If that answer is an easy no, maybe it's just filed under the wrong board. It should go over to, you know, maybe it's a
Psychology.
yeah, like psychology or something. It doesn't involve an SOTB. That happens as well. So we'll refer those off and things like that. So, but most of the cases come in and we do, because the bar is low to look at them, we do look at them. Almost all of them gets assigned to an investigator. So, you know, then they go through that process, and at any time do we feel that there's still the possibility of a violation, you know, because you may just start the investigation and realize that, okay, this just isn't even true, or, you know, something like that. You disprove an allegation or something, and that was the only one that you were really holding on to. Once you kind of get past that, once you see that it may get closed. Once the investigation is completely done as well, and it gets turned into me, if all the questions are answered and it's a very clear cut that there's no violations, then that can get closed just within regulatory. If there's any question, if there's any gray area, if there's any, I'm not so sure about this, that's going to come to the board. If there's any, like, yes, this is a violation and we need to determine what we're going to do, that's going to come to the board. So anything with any little bit of a question, I'm not an expert. I've been doing it for a long, long time, but I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in this profession, so I'm going to bring it to the board. Now that we have an SME that can actually help us a little bit even more in that triage. So, and also in making sure that our investigations are more thorough. So when we come to you, we know we've asked the right questions. We know we've gotten the right information that the decision makers, you all, need to make those decisions. So that's going to be a big help for us. And she recently came on, and we sent off some things to her for review. And so there's some things that are happening with those investigations that weren't happening. Also, we brought in another investigator, brand new investigator, but he's a very experienced investigator. He comes from a long history of investigations, and he really is at the ground running. That I'm rejuggling some of these cases as well. I'll let you know that when I was an investigator, some of these were cases that I handled. So when you pulled me out of the investigative pool, a lot of my stuff ended up going to other people, and that kind of swamping of other people can really cause a ripple effect across their board, across their caseload, and it becomes a big burden. And now that we've got another investigator, we're starting to unswamp everybody else. So, yeah, so that's kind of what's going on with your board investigations. I just wanted to, let you know that that's the status of investigations, and this all plays out into the bigger picture of what we're talking about with fiscals and stuff like that. We haven't had a big case for a while with this board. The last big case that we had was, we went all the way up to hearing, and I believe we spent a lot of time, money, and effort. I think the guy didn't even show up at the hearing, but we still get left with the bill. So, but I think we were righteous. We don't take question to a hearing. We don't take a weak case to a hearing. We don't do that. So we know if we're bringing it and we're going to go all the way to hearing, it's a strong case, but that doesn't make it cheaper. Sometimes those are the ones that we have to really stand behind, and make sure. And if you've got somebody throwing a gish gash at you with all kinds of crazy things, and you have to deal with those crazy things, or it may just go smoothly. Those are big questions whenever you go down the regulatory path. So that goes to what Bob was talking about, having a cushion, having a balance is important, because, or even if something comes along in the legislature and you have to interpret that can really back up too. But that's not my end. My end is more dealing with that. And what we try to do in regulatory is we try to get answers ahead of time so they don't become a problem later in the case. So sometimes we will spend a little bit of extra money on an opinion, on a question that we have, on a legal question. I have meetings with attorneys and things like that as needed. But it's always keeping in mind that you don't want to go crazy. You have to be fiscally responsible, but getting a little bit of advice here can cost us getting a lot of advice down the road. So spending a little bit money, in the grand scheme of things on a subject matter expert, save us a lot of money when we flip over to a hearing cost, and it's all very, costly and time consuming. So that's kind of where we are with that. And like I said, when we hire a subject matter expert, people may think, oh, well, that's money. Well, that's money well spent.
They are less expensive than
They are a lot
attorneys.
less expensive than attorneys, and they're a lot less expensive than getting into a bad case or spinning your wheels on any kind of case. So it can help you focus things and keep your investigations more focused as well. So rather than just trying to answer every question, they'll narrow you down. So it's really good thing, and I'm really excited to have a solid SME for this group. We haven't had an SME for a while. So yeah, so that's that. Talk about complaints by type. You can see that we've had these 14 complaints that are showing up on this regulatory report. 5 were licensing concerns and 9 were services provided. So it's a fair, even split. Licensing concerns is a big group. a lot of that can be uncertified people. I don't see completely uncertified people on these 3 biennium for some reason. I feel like that there were unlicensed cases, but sometimes unlicensed cases are actually somebody who had a license, who doesn't have a license anymore and is continuing work or something like that. So that could be also show up under licensing concern and that not show up as an unlicensed person because they don't have a license. It's just inactive or expired, like we talked about. Service provided, pretty straightforward, but it's a pretty big bucket as well. It can be anything. Service provided, it's pretty much any kind of practice standard violation is going to fall into that bucket. And then complainants by type. You don't have anybody that is showing up as anonymous. So of the 14 complaints, we know who filed the complaints. So that's unusual. Some boards are really, really high on the anonymous, but this group is pretty much, we don't have that anonymous thing as much. Clients, we haven't had a lot of client complaints either. Those kind of do come in waves. I have had times in my time here that all the complaints were from clients. So they were all coming from clients. They weren't happy. They were upset with, the way that their therapy was going or some restrictions or something like that was being placed on them. Some of those were really aimed at like the parole arm of it. And they weren't so much issues with their provider. They were more issues with parole, and the provider was kind of stuck in the middle of that whole process. That kind of is a trend with the client-driven ones, but sometimes those do have something to them, and they can't be discounted. So they're all put through. We haven't had a lot of clients. We've only had 1 on here. But again, these numbers can be, you can have a client complain and a client's mom complain, or you can have a client's mom complain and that doesn't show up as a client. And believe it or not, we do have some of the client complaints, which I maybe would really call as more of a service provided for a client, are a third party, a relative of the actual client. Those don't show up as a client on this report, just so you know. So it doesn't mean that we haven't had any complaints that are close to the client that are complaining, maybe kind of complaining on behalf of the client. But we also have other service providers on behalf of the client. So it's a lot of mix going on. You have a big mix of where your complaints come from, I think is the point. Not all of them directly from clients, but oftentimes close to clients or on behalf of clients. So, or just in general, somebody knows something is going on and they report it. So that is that's kind of the process. I think I've gone over a lot of different things. I hope it all made sense, but if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer questions about regulatory or things like that. I can't talk about individual cases, obviously, because this is open session and that kind of thing, but I can talk about things in general, trends, things like that.
Yeah. You may not know this, but of the 8 closed cases on this list here, do you have a sense of like how many of those were just closed because they were filed wrong? It was a double filing. It was like it's closed just pretty quickly versus closed because it doesn't quite meet the level of a violation.
I think that that's a hard one for this board. I don't think I get a lot of doubles. I can think of 1 or 2 cases, maybe in this group that might have been a double. Like it was reported to me, the same situation was reported by 2 people, 2 different, we have to log everything. So even if it's a duplicate and I know I'm logging a duplicate, that's how we account for these come into regular. We have to account for everything that comes in. So we assign the case and close it, and refer it off. But I don't think that there's a ton of that in here. I think there's maybe a couple. I can say there's probably a couple that just didn't meet a basic threshold, on review. It just doesn't meet a basic threshold. It's pretty rare with this. This is such a complicated board, and the issues at hand are often very complicated. Even saying somebody's working unlicensed is complicated with this board because there's still, even though the jurisdiction has widened, there's still some, I don't want to say traps, but there's still some snares that you have to make sure you're avoiding. You know, it used to be only adjudicated, right? It had to be adjudicated and mandated to be in therapy in order for us to have jurisdiction to look into the situation. If those two things weren't met, it was a non-starter. But sometimes you didn't know those things. But now pre-adjudication counts. And in general, all kinds of different things can count. But there are still some, I don't want to say loopholes because you know, the legislator put them in place for whatever reason the legislator put them in place. But things that may be, okay, well, this person doesn't have to have a license. And even if they practice that, even if they had a license, this isn't in their scope. They're actually falling under their other mental health license, right? So if your scope is this and you're doing this, and you have a license, you have a counselor's license or something, we may not have any jurisdiction to even look at it, even if you're practicing sex offender therapy, you know, sexual offense specific therapy. But it's under, or it doesn't, it would in general, except for this thing. So those things.
Complicated terrain.
It's a complicated terrain. So generally, we're going to look into them. We're going to put them to an investigator and we're going to look into them because of all of those intricacies. Now, sometimes it's very clear cut. You're just looking at the practice, but still, you're still looking at jurisdiction with this board. Not as much as it used to be. That used to be a big piece of what you were trying to figure out. But it's less now than it used to be. But there are still ones that get closed out that way. To make a long story short, there's still ones that get closed out for jurisdictional issues. And then the rest of them are mostly, you know, maybe you went through and you just found out that it wasn't true. Or it wasn't really, you know, you might get a complaint that the therapist was saying that, you know, oh, the person sent me back to jail. It's like, well, and unfairly or something like that. And then you look into it, and it wasn't the providers that back, it was parole officers sent them back to jail because they violated their parole because they stopped going to therapy or something like that, you know. So you know, those kind of things happen too within this group. So all of those things apply and all those things apply at different levels. I could say it's probably a mix. It's probably a mix of all of those things that's close these. I believe though, in that group of 14, I think at least one or two have come to the board over the last several years. So it's probably a mix of all of those.
Right. So closed meeting basically it's like not, doesn't meet threshold, doesn't get acted upon, there's no discipline, right? Is that closed means?
Closed in this,
What discipline?
yeah.
And it's
It could be discipline. It could be discipline in that eight closed. You may have a vote, it may have come to the board over the years and went to disciplinary action. And that would still be enclosed.
Okay, so if someone is found to have violated and needs to be disciplined, I can't remember last time, I know we talked about this last time.
Mhm.
Does it always come to the board or does it like, are there ones that have been closed since over the past year, for example? Or maybe someone's been disciplined, because I would assume that they would have to be on the website where you can look it up.
If somebody was disciplined under this board, it would have come to them.
Okay, it has to come to the board.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember the exact wording for this board's, whether they're with the advice of, whether that's the direction of, I'm not for exactly, I think it might be advice of this board, but HLO has a policy, will, even if we don't have to, we have boards where we don't even have to take them to the board. And we have boards where they have to sign off, literally vote, or we couldn't take action. This board is somewhere in between, like most of our boards. But as a policy, we're going to bring them to the board to take disciplinary action because we want the board's weigh in. And the board is, you know, you're here for a reason, you know, for your expertise, for your guidance, you know, for your you know, for your knowledge. And so we bring those things to you, so we can put it into context of your profession. Because, you know, we don't want to be, you know, we may have a different perspective or a different view on
You're
it.
built-in subject matter
Yeah.
experts.
We may be overly harsh, but we may be overly lenient, you know? And every board sees even the same violation as more serious or less serious. And it's gonna be really, it takes the same thing to one board and it's a really big deal in that profession. Versus it's not as much of an issue in another profession, so.
Oh, another thing that you didn't mention, if another entity is investigating, say something is criminal, we're gonna let that play out or we step in, because why dual investigate, muddy the waters, also incurring costs. We've had other boards, we try to solve things at the lowest price point to your issues earlier. And if they're going to end up criminal and they're gonna be, and we've had a person, if they're gonna go to jail, why would we spend the money chasing them when we could just refuse to renew? That is an inexpensive way to make sure they're no longer in the pot, right? So if there might be another organization that's investigating and we'll just wait and the case is open because we're gonna let those wheels finish before.
And that's a good point that I actually didn't bring up, especially with this board, because every single licensee in this board now that we used to have people that didn't have another health professional license, but that has gone. We don't have that anymore. Everybody has another license. And just because, you know, and they have different standards and different ethical standards and different issues around dual relationships, or what is a dual relationship, what isn't a dual relationship, and it maybe it's not a violation for us. Maybe, but it may be a violation under their other mental health professional board. It may not be a violation under that board, but it may be a violation under our board, because, you know, my understanding is that everything they do as a, say, a licensed counselor we don't have jurisdiction over, but everything that somebody does as a licensed counselor / SOTB is under that jurisdiction. So, you know, there's sometimes we're actually either coordinating or waiting for the other mental health professional board to give us a determination of what they think about it. And sometimes they're waiting for us. So it kind of goes both ways, and it does get very complicated with this. It's not all about us. So.
Thank you. Ask one more quick one.
Sure.
A little bit short, interaction. And this may be something that we're gonna talk about. This is the next agenda. So maybe pushing it to that, but it has to do with kind of jurisdiction. You know, we've talked about this HB 4086 bill and work group previously, and it was the big questions about these, mostly about the under 12-year-olds and what's in SOTB's jurisdiction and what is, you know, we saw some clarification. Is my understanding that really what I came away with was that like 0 years old till 100 is under, as long as it's in, you said it used to be that the oversight of the sport was over adjudicated, mandated. Now it's even more than pre-adjudicated. There's that definition of kind of abusive behaviors, manipulative, coercive, you know, type of behaviors that would constitute some oversight over who's going to provide specialized service. And that could be an 8-year-old kid who did those behaviors in such a way that fits that definition. So if that's the case, and for example, you know, there continues to be, we'll talk about it, continued disagreement and kind of different people saying there's different people that should be providing those services, child therapists to CACs, child advocacy center staff to SOTB certified folks. The problem comes now with, and the problem comes, I mean, it's a board problem, but it's also an us problem, because we, again, on front lines, are getting referrals, hearing from people that are coming that are saying, hey, my 8-year-old son did these things. We've been seeing a therapist at so-and-so spot. They knew that these were those issues. And then I'm thinking to myself, man, I'm just running through what's the jurisdiction of the SOTB and what's the response? And not that anybody wants to file a board complaint, but it's like, there's been so much muddy water around like, what's the jurisdiction? And I would imagine, why I bring it up here is like the regulatory piece of like, if there was a complaint made, so maybe that's the advice from you of like, but, and so whereas stuff like that might not go towards board complaints or actions or whatever, it doesn't still alleviate like what's our role as practitioners, as certified people following the standards when you have something like this. So again, I know we were going to talk about this, so it may go better there, but that's a big piece of the regulatory is like our role kind of in making sure that our colleagues are practicing in a way that's ethical and by the standards, but it's really complicated for us these days.
Yeah, and I think kind of scenario that you're giving, I mean, an investigation is every investigation is a shiny. Every single one is a different set of facts. Even when they're similar set of facts, they're different set of facts. And there's not only just what really happened, there's what you can prove happened, what you can document happened, what people are willing to talk about what happened, what people are willing to go to a hearing and stand by of what happened. So it becomes kind of a complicated web of what's going on in that particular situation. And they're all extremely, like, when it gets to regulatory, it's all very unique and fact-based
Case
and
by
proof-based and case by case. Policy is a little more overarching, like this is what everybody is supposed to do. And they can kind of set those standards with the board, with the board's help and use statute. But so, if faced with a situation like you're putting out there, there's somebody who would fall under, the definition of what we consider under this board. And that it is mandatory that only somebody who's licensed by this board is actually able to provide that person with that specific therapy. We would have to look into that situation specifically. And as you can imagine, that would be very difficult to, and I'm not saying impossible, but it is a very difficult path to go down to find out, to kind of bust into the private space of that 8-year-old
Minor.
therapy session, find out why that 8-year-old was going to therapy, find out exactly, and it would be a very sensitive subject, and it would be very difficult to get solid answers for. So, you're right to say, we think that we should be handling this, somebody that's qualified by we, that somebody that's qualified under this board you should be handling that. And legally, they should be handling it. But when you're talking about that level of parsing that out, it can become very, very difficult. Be a little easier with adults, a little easier when things are out, maybe on the open because there's criminal issues or things like that. But yeah, I mean, that becomes a really hard regulatory problem. It's a difficult policy problem, but it's an even harder regulatory problem because of the kind of the sealed nature of those kind of relationships. Not to say it can't be dealt with, not to say that people wouldn't be honest and open about what's going on, but and just say, sometimes people are like, this is what's going on. And it's totally fine because I'm licensed and I can do it. And other times they're like, I'm not gonna tell you what's going on, or I'm only gonna give you very limited information because I have either feel in professional obligations and not.
I don't
or
want to create a record.
I can put up, there's a lot of legal barriers to getting those type of records too, and getting that kind of detail on what's going on in the therapy session. So, I mean, you can understand that is a very difficult situation from a regulatory standpoint to handle. Not to say we couldn't or wouldn't try, but it would be a difficult problem to crack.
The other hurdle to that, about the muddy waters is if another agency has statutory authority to require something or to require something to be done and who's to do it, we're not gonna be, we have no say in it, right? We're not gonna challenge, DHS.
Yeah, we're not gonna go to war
Or
with
DCBS
DHS.
or anybody else, right? If they have the authority to assign and make things happen, that's their authority, that's their issue. If we get a complaint about it and we start looking into it and we see that, DHS has required this, DHS has statutory authority, we may call and talk to, Travis's counterpart or the investigator to understand what they will tell us. I mean, because like Travis said, getting anything out of DHS about a minor is verboten, right? Regardless of what our statutory authority is, they're not gonna tell us anything about a subpoena. And then that is iffy. Yeah, we may call to discern, to find out, do we have any authority here at all? But if we don't, we receive a complaint and we close it and typically note that it's a DHS issue and DHS, we will even ask for a case and leave it at that. It's, it's like touching boiling water. You know, how far do you want to stick your toe in the water, right?
Can I, part of the problem is that again, part of the issue is exactly what you're saying though, because there's not other jurisdictional authority from anybody else right now. And that's precisely what the issue is. And what 4086 was, we were hoping would do is that, and we talked about that we're gonna let them do their process and they may redo some, they're already in there, it's a legislative process. So they're gonna make recommendations and maybe help define the language so that, because however much of a regulatory issue this is or a policy issue, it's also a practitioner in the field issue, because we're in this place of like seeing, and we're having people come to us asking, should I see this provider? And we're like, and they're an amazing child therapist. And it's a 6-year-old kid and it's, but under my current understanding of what the SOTB rules are about who should be providing a service to that type of youth, that age, with those issues, it should be an SOTB certified person. And so then if they're not, like the end of the whole thing is like, do we file a complaint on this? Like that's crappy. But more than any of, it doesn't really go there. It hasn't gone there, at least for us to make a complaint. It's more of just like this conundrum because there's no other jurisdiction that has stepped up or has said anything different. And the only thing, and this got brought up, I mean, Robbie was in that work group of like, all these minds are getting together trying to figure out, well, who takes these 12 and under kids with these sexualized behavior issues? And we're part of that conversation too, but it's also like, hey, by the way, the SOTB board already has pre-existing jurisdiction, has language around that. So you can, 4086, which may go in and make a legislative change, but as of right now, what you're suggesting are some of your recommendations of like, well, the Oregon Health Authority should be leading the response with, and it's a behavioral health mandate with like, and let's open it up to like, so we can get more people in that do a weekend training and then go right at it. I guess until they change the legislation and it maybe would change the SOTB then jurisdiction, but until that time, if they're doing that and there's people that are actively seeing these youth, that is against SOTB, like that shouldn't be. And so it puts, again, regulation and policy are one thing, but us being in the middle of it and trying to like, I don't know, trying to make sense of this whole thing, what our response is.
Yeah, and I think that also goes to a few things that were said about DHS. Not, we don't want to go to war with DHS. We don't want to go to war with anybody. We don't have to, of course, but we want to work with these other agencies. We want to work with, the other mental health professional regulatory boards when we need to as well. And, you know, and sometimes we also we have this jurisdictional issue with a lot of other boards. There are other boards that are similar to this, but even like things like aesthetics versus massage therapy, you know, there's all this overlap and you have to go, you know, that somebody's got a license, some other mental health professional license, and they don't have the SOTB license. And they're handling a client that, you know, we would say, oh, you gotta have this license to do this. You know, sometimes it's very clear cut, adjudicated, mandated, those kind of things, right? Sometimes it's a little less clear cut. And, you know, sometimes we actually have to defer to their other mental health license. Sometimes the complaint goes to them and say, well, you have this license, you shouldn't be dealing with this person because it's outside of what you should be doing because you should have this license to do it. Sometimes they'll do that. Sometimes, you know, sometimes they'll say, no, what they're doing is perfectly okay under their license. And then to us, we're kind of like, well, you know, what are we gonna do?
Now
Like,
what do we do?
yeah, we go to a hearing on that type of situation, their defense is going to be, it was okay. My board says it's okay, you know, well, we say it's not, and that becomes a genuine fight, you know, so, you know, those kind of things, it is definitely better to have those things cleared up and dealt with, kind of more in a collaborative way, agreed upon way, and then when those things become violated, then they come my way, or they go, you know, but dealing with it, me dealing with it before it's really been agreed upon is probably not the ideal way to deal with it, but it doesn't mean it's not sometimes the way it gets dealt with. You know, that does happen where nobody has made a decision or made a declaration, and so regulatory ends up having to do that. Make that declaration, and it becomes, it's kind of like you have a lot of laws out there on the books. And some of them may be a little ambiguous until there's a court case, and then you have a court, you know, then you have a precedent through a court, and now that's the law of the land, not necessarily what the statute,
So they call them opinions.
it's been adjudicated through a court, and now that is how this is interpreted, and everybody underneath that has to go by that interpretation, until it goes to a higher court, and then it gets changed. So it's not that much different in this situation. Sometimes that's how things are decided. It's not the best way to decide things, or not the best way to decide everything. Sometimes it's the only way to decide. So, but, and you know, and sometimes we're on the point, sometimes we're just riding the wave or waiting for somebody to make that, you know, decision or make that clarification. So complicated. Yeah. That's not the best answer,
Yeah.
but I mean, the answer is it's complicated.
This is Bob. So we've been talking about House Bill 4086 for the record, you know, so.
Before we get there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I like to close loops. That's my job. So to your earlier question, I know you talked about the 3-year envelope, you know, within an active, according to statute, the definitions for active, inactive, all of that is in 676-562. An inactive means an authorization that's been not current for 3 years or less. Inactive, and over here we have issuance of authorization 676-572. Talks about annual 1-year licenses, except for cosmetology, that gives you 2. So the active for 1 year, inactive for 3, and expired is all standardized and written in our HLO rules. So just because you had a question on that, our statutes, just because you had a question, I wanted to close that for you before we.
What was the OAR? Was that OAR or O?
Oh, this is ORS, or
ORS.
revised statutes. It's 676-562 that talks about active, inactive, and expired. So just to help with that.
And by the way, that 676, that one issue, that's an overarching HLO
Covers all of the
statute
programs.
that covers everybody. And then you have your own set of statutes
That
that
apply
cover, that
just to you.
apply just to you. And if it's not clarified or specified in your statutes, you would fall under the general. So, which is what she just gave.
This is Devin, real quick follow. Is it in statute for the inactive 3-year? Is it in statute that then therefore the person needs to back pay all the, or is that an HLO? Something the HLO?
I believe it talks about, fees, office responsibilities. But I would have to look that up for you. Oh, okay. Here it is. In order to activate an inactive authorization, the holder of the authorization shall submit to the office within 3 years after the authorization not receiving an activation fees established by the office under 676, 576, and any other information required by the office by rule. So 676, 576 is the late fee and things like that.
So the office of HLO decides what, that it needs to be
Mhm.
back paid, not a statute.
No, statute gives us the authority to say, you're late, we pay a late fee. You've been late for 2 years, we pay.
Need
your
to
late
get
fee and your
current.
unit to bring you current.
So anyways, side item, but like to solve things within the same meeting if we can.
And I was just gonna clarify for the record that we've been talking about the policy H bill, House Bill, 4086. Even though we get third, but we have been talking about it.
We kind of moved from regulatory to the policy. Yeah, so we're done talking about I mean, you can ask questions as we move along if something comes
Well,
up.
it all
but
works together.
It all kind of works together.
This is John. So, and I don't know. So the 2 complaints that have come in on this biennium for services provided.
Mhm.
Can you speak to what the nature of those 2 complaints are?
You know,
Okay.
I can't right now. I mean,
We would need an
I don't
executive
think-
session to be specific.
Okay.
yeah, and I don't, I wouldn't be able to talk about them specifically, but yeah.
He's got 400 cases rolling in his head.
Like I said,
It's been a big
been a big
hectic year. It's
year.
been a pretty hectic month. We've been doing our close-in meetings for everybody. So it's been a real hectic couple of months and it's been a hectic year.
Yeah, I was just gonna point out, this is Bob, that for a group of folks that licensees that have to deal with, caseloads, imagine 400 cases potentially between 6 investigators. Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah, that's someone's,
Sometimes it takes a
someone's putting
while.
anybody out, but Brittany's over there shaking her head. Ooh.
So, if we switch into policy?
If the chair is okay with that.
Yeah. So, one of the things that you guys, I wanted to get that statute for Thomas. But one of the things you asked me for the last time we met was to find, I believe this was finalized and released in September, this report. And I wasn't asked to do anything with it. I was asked to provide it. So there it is. Based on our earlier conversations, though, I know you talked about legislative concepts. Going forward, I'm not sure who is going to act on the results of this report. But I will say if there seem to be a lot of emerging issues in this report and and government's very reactive, right? When you pass a bill, it means there's a problem here that's pervasive and there's no money in the private sector to be made in solving it, right? But somebody has to solve it. So government is very reactive. And what I got out of this was there's emerging issues that really there's no built-in tools in the toolbox to handle, right? And a lot of it looked, from a regulatory standpoint, a little scary. You're dealing with kiddos, really young kiddos. You're dealing with questions of intent. Like, what is the knowledge here? Do we want to really label these kiddos? Who takes care of them? Who decides who takes care of them? And a lot about investigations, how that all unfolds. And so with that being said, I got it for you. Here it is. So however you want to talk about it.
I'll just, this is Robbie English. I'll just start. So I sat on the committee and for 11 months. And I think I may have shared with you that pretty early on, I identified that there was some problematic unintended language kind of being relayed that would kind of fly in the face of SOTB requirements. And so within the first couple of months, I provided the facilitators that went on the website, the OARs with that specific and alerted them to the specific language about the behavior that regardless of age, if you've met that or child met that behavior, it needed to be treatment with an SOTB certified provider. And then, as kind of time went on and there was conversation about, opening that field up and different modalities and really kind of expanding into folks that are not certified, just kind of reinforcing the importance of the board and the licensing and having standards for folks providing the treatment. So I think you can, and then throughout there was also, as Devin mentioned, there was conversation from folks about the barriers specifically regarding cost of licensure. So just wanted to put that forward that in the beginning, I provided the documents and then throughout, I continuously did reminders of why it's important that we have high standards for treatment providers and Oregon's rules versus what was being recommended from other states. And while it's maybe great programs, they don't fit what our rules are here. And so
Thank you for being that voice
Mhm.
for the policy work.
Steve didn't really, but I tried. So, obviously, there's a lot of concerns with the report, and that with regards to this board, was what I was fairly vocal about on the different occasions.
I did have one question, if I might spin this around on you guys.
Shannon has her hand up as well.
Oh. Please, Shannon.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to say, looking, and I haven't read every detail of this report. I've sort of skimmed it before the meeting, and I just want to preface that. But looking at the list of folks involved, there is no one from domestic and sexual violence advocacy services in here. This continues to be a huge gap and a problem with these types of committees that are created, usually out of our legislature and our state entities. I know that children's abuse advocates are involved, but usually when these things are going on, there's also elements of domestic violence, intimate partner violence in the home. Histories of those things are very common. And the expertise, the knowledge, and the responses from somebody serving that adult victim survivor who's caretaking children with these challenges is often very different from what you would see from the abuse advocate for the child. And so you really, really need both of those perspectives in these spaces when you're digging into possible problems and solutions. And so I just want to name that is a huge oversight. And it really concerns me that nobody was involved from the domestic and sexual violence victim advocate community in this project.
So this is Robbie English. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think victims' voices were very much missing, and even within the first month, changing the language around how we refer to a victim. I was also vocal about how offensive I felt that was.
And to your point, Shannon, this is Ann. If any legislation comes out of this report or cites this report, it's very important from the testimony standpoint, or if you wish to come and speak. You, as a member of the board, you can always testify. at legislation. The important part is to remind them what hat you're wearing when you're sitting there. You can say, yes, I am a member of the Sexual Offense Treatment Board. However, I am here as a victim advocate, or I am here as a provider of services, right? So just so they know where you're coming from. It's important if legislation comes out of this to bring that to their attention and say, you know, because remember we talked about the, has the right attitude to provide services. There was a whole world out there that did not know about this legislation. And that's why watching legislation is so important, so that when you can err and say, hey, if you're basing it on this and this entire population was ignored, bringing that to their attention is a really, really good idea. And one of the things I noticed, I didn't see a lot of numbers on this. Again, this is a lot of emerging things. And I sit there as in the regulatory world and go, wow, this is overlapping with this. And what about this? And what about this? And you know, it's a very, very complicated ecosystem. When we talk about unintended consequences, my question reading this was, if the legislature decided that anyone, intent unknown, you know, they was acting out, they saw something. I understand access to porn is really driving a lot of this stuff. If they decided that only SO providers could help, do you have enough SO providers to meet the need?
No.
Another thing to keep
Right.
in mind. Yeah.
I appreciate that. This is Devin. I think that the thing, I mean, I think my take from this, and I wasn't on the work group, but reading it and kind of, we had a couple folks from our group that were on the work group. I think, you know, I think that I agree with a lot of it and the heart behind it, the intent behind it. I just think there's so many problematic parts. And I think that, you know, that's a conversation for a different setting, but I think that part of what I'm fearful about with this is that, you know, there is a certain point where, you know, I think part of the initial intent of this work group, and really like beyond the work group, just like this hole that we have in our field for these under 12-year-old kids who have these behaviors. We've already talked about it, and the lack of like, who does the treatment? What do you do? And all that stuff. You know, they started this work group and pretty quickly, you can correct me if I'm wrong with this stuff, but you know, they changed the wording from problematic sexual behavior to complex sexual behavior, thereby kind of lumping, both talking about 12 and under, who we traditionally would think of as problematic sexual behavior, PSB, versus 13 and, you know, up to like 18 or young adult illegal sexual behavior. That's how we differentiate those two terms. Illegal sexual behavior meaning these are youth usually of like a chargeable age. That their
Is that linked
behaviors.
to intent and understanding?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, so it goes into that age group. You know, the court generally views them as they were no
There's an
longer.
awareness.
There's awareness. Where 12
Got
and
it.
under, there's a lot of reasons. It's reactionary. It's you know, observing sexualized behavior. You know, when they're young. There's a lot of things. Very few of which are often about really knowing what they're doing. So we want to look at it differently. And so they changed this language to complex, thereby lumping in, you know, anybody under 18. So when they're making these recommendations and when they go to the legislature or whatever they're doing with this, and they've kind of made recommendations about, well, here's who we think are doing, this is what best practice is. And a lot of like trauma-based therapies, trauma-focused CBT, all good therapies in their right spot for the right
Cognitive behavioral therapy.
cognitive behavioral therapy. And then there's some new ones that are kind of based out of CBT, TFC, with a wing of it being for problematic sexual behaviors. None of which we, in our world, utilize. And they certainly wouldn't, there's probably pieces of those best practice, therapies that would fit somewhat in like the ATSA juvenile standards, but not really, because they come from, again, these come from people in this work group and kind of nationally who are looking at child advocacy centers and child therapists that use more trauma-based with these younger kids. And so if this goes to legislature, And this is a question for you all. And they're looking at the lumping of 0 to 18, and they're saying our recommendation is that best practice for 0 to 18 is these TF, CBT, PSB, and these ones that we don't use. And then some of like what, what kind of proposals of like what usually is happening is it's a weekend training. So they're wanting to get people into the field, and that's the heart, again, the crossroad of like, we all want more people in the field. To your point, like we know we can't handle those PSB. There's so many of those kids and we don't have enough people. However, it can't be at the cost of like quality treatment and a high bar. So it's like, we're trying to figure out like, how do you check both boxes at the same
The
time?
push-pull on that is
It's hard.
really difficult.
So my main concern being, if this goes to legislature, is there any chance that like any of SOTB stuff gets usurped by this legislation that says, well, now what we're putting into, just based on what you just said previously about how some of that, a Hallmark case can set precedent, a legislative endeavor can set precedent, and now we're like, oh, so now whether we like it or not, now SOTB's broken in half with the adolescents and kids and the adults because that got usurped by this bill that feels really, with the sport group, that feels really flawed in those recommendations that had competing agendas and all the things. So I don't know, I guess I'm just stating some of the main concern here that would incorporate this board. There's a lot more concern that I think outside this board, we're all talking about, not together at once, but.
It's an emerging issue and it's emotionally fraught.
Mhm.
It's very difficult. Everyone wants what's best at the lowest price point, right? Everybody wants what's best and everyone's very passionate. Again, we're in a receiving position. If your associations are involved, get them involved. If you can get and I will say this, the first person with an idea sets the agenda. Then it's up to everybody else to shoot that down and come up with something better. If in your wisdom as providers, advocates, if you can come up with language, again, I would encourage you to get as many people to the table as possible because the legislature does not like to settle squabbles. That's where the attorneys come in. Get people to the table. If you've got a model, something that you think will work, some way to approach it, work with DHS maybe, because a lot of it seem to come out of child abuse investigations. Okay, if that's the nexus, if there's a way you can get closer to that and say, okay, can we come up with something? It might be able to be done at the policy level. If they have the authority, have your associations talk to DHS and say, this is really important. Is there a way that we can get it more involved at a level with the laws that we have now? If you don't see an avenue, if you're trying to build a road to drive on, get as many people to the table as possible, because you don't want to have somebody show up at a hearing and go, this isn't going to work because of, you don't want to do that. Try to work that out before you go and really think about your overlapping authorities and say, okay, if we can't talk to these kiddos because they're too young, or if these investigations are sealed, how can we as providers enter that space? Is it making ourselves more available? Is it working on rules at a certain level? There might be an avenue now. I don't know DHS's world. I barely understand the universe I'm in. I just have a little satellite. So those are avenues to you as providers. Legislation, like I said, is usually a last resort for drawing lines. And you guys are just a wash in gray right now, right? And sometimes if they try to make gray black and white, you're going to have some people fall on one side, some people are going to fall on the other, and they don't want to be there. And the SOTB is, we try to make it a black and white world as gray as it is, right? So figuring out what DH is doing, having those conversations with them. Yes, Shannon, please.
Hi, thank you again. I just wanted to add that this does look like it is on its path to legislature. I just want to name that there is a work group that's been convened by Representative Hartman that is looking at the recommendations made from this report. I just learned about this work group yesterday and managed to get myself an invite to that meeting, which is this afternoon. So happy to connect with anyone outside of this meeting, separate from the board, one-on-one, just to share information and talk about how
I
we
think
could
that's
work together for
fantastic,
that.
Shannon. And thank you for, I was gonna say, I went off, I was like, oh, how did I not know about this? Well, apparently it's breaking news. So, again, just make sure your roles are clear, that you're not here as an SOTB member. And if there's anything that you think we need to know about, so that we can be prepared to either follow something, hunt something down, like, we don't know what we don't know sometimes. Like, even finding this report was not easy. This was not something that was widely published. Somebody called us and asked us about it from the media and included the link. Because you go to like LPRO, legislative policy, it really wasn't widely published. So knowing that this is out there, knowing these conversations, include us, if nothing else, so that I can keep my ear to the ground and help in any way that I can. But it's going to be really interesting to see what comes out of this. But yeah, call me if you have a question offline and we can chat.
Okay, this is Devin. Thanks for that. So you're saying that, like, just in theory, if they go and legislation passes, that's stuff that could impact SOTBs.
It depends on what it is. They say there's two things you never want to see made, laws and sausage. You never know. Sometimes things go, and I'm serious, you know what I'm talking about. If something will go in and it looks a certain way and it comes out the back end and it's been amended or gutted, they can just scrape the whole thing out and drop a whole new thing in halfway through. The things that happen are, and that's why we all go bananas. Poor Bob is watching legislation on the weekends. They're dropping amendments on the weekends or at night, or you just don't know what's going on there. And somebody goes through legislative council, they get an amendment, they get a change, and boom, it's there. And here we go, and so we never know. I had somebody on staff ask me, do you have any idea at the beginning of session what's going to end up coming out the back? No, it's just watching this machine work. And so letting us know that there's something out there at least puts it on my radar, and I can, put a tickler on it and keep an eye on it for you. But when there's 5,000, and they give us a drop of 800 and something bills, and they'll have a relating to clause, and the relating to clause is healthcare. Okay, can you narrow that down a little bit? And you're scanning like crazy, trying to see, does this affect us in any way? What about our licensees? What about our boards? And so running that and having anybody clue me into something is immensely helpful. And we analyze it from our board's perspective, but as citizens, people who are involved, practitioners, you can provide testimony, you can register to speak. You can even do it, they do it now through Teams or whatever their online is. You can testify. And I have to represent the board. I have to do it on your behalf. But if you want to get involved, please do. And let me know so I can watch too.
Okay.
I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, yeah. There's things we can't do, but that doesn't mean that if somebody says, hey, here's a tool, what would this mean for us? Because knowing all those lenses and how everything will fall, it's hard. It's really hard. And we do our best to analyze it, but then if it goes through and we look at it again, we see things we didn't see the first time because we were just doing broad strokes, Again, it's the what. What do you have to do? But then when you have time to think about it, you get into the how. Right? Unless it's good character and then we just go, okay. But yeah, I know this is really difficult, and just processing this report was quite something.
Dropping gavel, just heavy arms. Any other questions or discussion about this bill?
It's really, really tough. And the subject matter is tough. And the people who are involved are pretty brave. So let's hope something good comes out of it. And again, if your associations want to meet with one of these representatives, they don't know what they don't know any more than I, and bringing the legislators that were involved in that one bill told you about that they pressed pause on, were unaware. As big as it was, that there were additional rings that they didn't know about, and it concerned them. So if you can find someone, get in there and talk to them, it helps. I mean, that's where the stuff comes from. So. You can get DHS too. Has your association, I mean, it's outside, but your association ever had a meeting with DHS on any of these issues?
We've tried really hard. To get DHS people's like which DHS person who's best point of contact based on the levels and. Yeah, but it's a constant conversation of trying to get the association.
This is John, because we'll hear that, oh, you should contact, Sue Smith. And so then we contact Sue Smith and she says, no, it's this person over here.
Telephone game.
Yeah, it's, we go, yeah, OHA is, and that's probably, I think, one of the things I found, there's several things I found problematic, because I represent the youth authority on this work group. And I only did half of it because the person who did represent youth authority was shifted over to legislative affairs and I took her place. And so, but my problem with it was, one, hanging it on OHA for yet another thing that OHA would have to oversee. And two, my voice was that, and similar to what Devin was talking about, I run into so many cases of a child, age 6 to 10, who is demonstrating problematic sexual behaviors, and a parent or a teacher reports to child welfare, and child welfare says, what are we gonna do? And so they recommend they go see a therapist. Well, if that might be well and good if they live, like near, higher ground. But when you're in Harney County, where are you going to find someone who is skilled to address problematic sexual behaviors? And my concern is that, and I work with so many youth in custody who, if they had had an intervention at 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, chances are they wouldn't be under,
Sitting in front of
they
you.
wouldn't be, they wouldn't be at McLaren or something.
It's telehealth. I mean, I don't want to say telehealth is the answer to everything. I know. But is it, and I don't know, you're the experts, is this kind of effective treatment on the little kiddos? Is it something that can be done? It has to be done in person, is what you're saying.
I mean, in a pinch, it's
Right.
30% is good. And it depends on.
Because some people it is, and that's why I
Right.
didn't know if that was something.
Well, and if they're younger, sometimes, it's
Can't
not
even pay
just talk
attention.
therapy, it's play therapy, it's different expression therapies that kind of help those, because kids like that age, they don't, their language is play, their language is not sitting in front of, that's adult.
A screen.
Right.
And we learned that lesson during the pandemic. How many kindergartners through 4th graders were had zero education for 2 years because they were told to sit in front of a tablet?
But they can when they play Minecraft. Somebody explain that to me.
Minecraft's
I
more
can't
fun
even
than
get my
having.
nexus attention in.
And having Charlie Brown's teacher. Wah, 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 wah.
Okay,
Yeah,
no,
so
no,
it's not-
something I was curious about.
And I do
yeah.
contract with, I'm a contract administrator for a number of providers who do provide treatment to juveniles in rural areas, and they will do either telehealth or in person on a when they can.
Semi-regular.
But it is, when we're dealing with Harney County, Mount Airy County, Wheeler County, that's the best we get sometimes.
It was just something I was,
Yeah.
problem solving but I don't know your world and I know sometimes it's helpful and sometimes it's not.
Let's, Bob, so how do you solve that issue out from county?
You mandate sex offense certification, sex offense treatment certification, if you're going to provide that. So, somebody, because I'm sorry, this is John. In Northeastern Oregon, our community mental health agency is Community Counseling Solutions, and they provide mental health counseling to 5 or 7 rural counties and 0 certified sex offense treatment providers.
So this is Bob, if you mandate it and there's nobody out there to do it, how do you do it?
How do you provide any help?
I think if you John, I think if you mandate it, again, this is the A+ version of me,
Sure.
is, and you have, Sam Smith, who sits at Boardman, providing services to children and youth for Community Counseling Solutions. And now you're saying, all right, dude, if you, I forgot the name I gave him, then, you have to be certified for this. And here is who here's how you go through that process in order to do this. Then CCS is going to have to support that. Lifeways is gonna have to support that. Klamath Basin Mental Health is gonna have to support that. Right now, I think they really enjoy the carve out. Because I know personally, my anecdotal story is I know a youth who lives in Hermiston who just turned 12, and I was working with him when I was in private practice. And they shift when I shut that down to go to work for the youth authority, they shifted him over to CCS. And his parents are saying, I don't know what this guy's skill set is, but he's not doing nearly what you were doing with our child, our son. And he's gonna turn 13 in June. And if he engages in that behavior, then all of a sudden we've got county juvenile involved. We've got OYA involved. When it could have been dealt with an effective.
But you're saying he's exempt, that new therapist.
That new exempt is exempt, yeah, because he works for CCS.
So exemptions can be an issue
Mhm.
and balancing best practices with access. This is not your board, but one of my other boards, the behavior analysis board, because when you're working, and you probably know kiddos on the autism spectrum, you have a very small window of intense time to rewire the brain, right? And there were some folks saying, well, some help is better than no help.
Yeah.
And other people were saying, I'll mortgage my house. I need the best help possible within this 2-year period. So balancing quality and access is a constant, it's a constant thing. And thinking about the unintended consequences when you're going forward, say, okay, is this something we need to expand training to professionals? Should there be a para provider that has a certain amount of training, minimum standards, again, maybe, a basement, you can, and think about that too, access, because that's one thing that Michael deals with is the availability of appropriate training. Because you might be treating somebody with alcoholism and sex offense type behavior, and you're dealing with the same person, but you're dealing with different issues, right? So making sure that people are trained for that issue, not the overall, that kind of thing, and availability of training. Other states call us up and we're desperately trying to get our arms around this world. What do we do? And no state's the same, because there's really no path education wise, there's really no path for this work.
This is John. Well, and I happen to know that there is a work group being developed with ATSA to develop a nationwide level of certification.
That would be a relief for a lot of
Yeah, they're
states.
running into some barriers with that because, there's this patchwork of sex offense treatment certifications around the country. Not every state has it. But then how do you work with the states that do, the Oregons, the Washingtons, Californias, Minnesota, places like that? So that you're saying that myself, I'm certified in the state of Oregon. Am I going to be willing to pay for the ATSA certification as well? And so.
And
it's
Oregon's very high.
It is.
I mean, we have some folks that will just send in an application and a check without ever reading the laws and rules, right? And they're like, oh yeah, well, I'm certified in Texas. And I'm just saying Texas, but then you compare our qualifications
Yeah.
versus compare. And it's like, okay, you need to have 10 hours in high-fiving and 2 liters of Pepsi, and you can have this certification. And we've got mental health licenses and we've got all of this stuff. And it's very hard for anyone to come in on like reciprocity because there's no one like us. And I got a call from somebody in Alaska and it's like, how do you make this work? I don't know. We're
This is John, the therapist that I have at Tillamook Youth Correctional Facility came from Texas. And so I had to live through that. So I was.
you know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about.
and so she was going through reciprocity, but again, God bless Michael, is, and so helping her get, she went through SOTB, she went to Safer Society, she went to ATSA and took the on-demand training in order to meet Oregon standards and is now full clinical.
Yeah.
But again, that's an A student mindset. That is, what do I need to do? Because it is out there.
How do I get there?
Yeah,
Right.
the trainings are out there. You just gotta know where to look.
Yeah, and we've had other trainings that I went to look for to see if it was helpful, and our board at the time, Dr. Davis, I brought back something, I think it was called the Cincinnati model or something. Right, he did that. He made the same
Dr.
thing.
Davis is a friend of mine.
He did the same thing, and I said, well, what about this? And, and so again, finding something, every state has its own flavor, right? And its own concerns.
Yeah.
And finding something that fits for Oregon, it's like our own little nation, So just let us know whatever we can do to help.
I recently, in fact, yesterday was my first meeting there's a work group with the DOC. to find a way to bring certified sex offense therapists into DOC cert. And there's some resistance because DOC's been doing just fine from their point of view, just fine having, having a behavioral health specialist that is just really good with people, providing sex offense treatment using the Cincinnati curriculum to adults in custody. And the community and DOC is not as bought into that as community corrections. It's community corrections uses it all 36 counties. And so that's what our work group is starting to dive
And it's
into.
very hard, just from a legislative standpoint. I mean, remember I said they don't like to adjudicate, squabbles at the legislative level. Whenever you have a heavy hitter like that, who is opposed, it's a tough battle. And a lot of them are, well, we don't want to have to pay for those certifications. We don't want to pay for higher level providers because we're trying to do okay for a lot of people versus awesome for a few, right? And so this is not news to you.
Yeah, it costs $3,000 to be trained in the Cincinnati curriculum. And counties across the state are paying for that, to have their POs and community corrections trained.
I did not know that.
Yes.
That's news to me. So hopefully now we might have a meeting in the meantime, special meeting. So if Josh reaches out to you, if special meeting, if we have cases, if you can't make it, tell us right away. Because we don't want to spin up a whole meeting and then not have quorum. We like to have, especially if it's discipline. But hopefully, unless we have a special meeting, and that would just be for cases, we will have something more to talk about when we come back in May. The session will have already happened.
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna ask. This, John, would it be worthwhile to have an analysis of this document to see, is the legislature even gonna, because short session, it's usually tightly packed.
Oh, it's.
And chances are they're gonna spend most of their time dealing with financial, budget
It would be
issues.
unusual, but not, right, unusual, but not unheard of. We've had boards come out of the short session. And it's really tough when we ask for like legislative testimony, like the intent and all that, and it went by like, there is nothing, right? It wouldn't be unheard of. Usually the short session is repair. Something is broken. We had a program, couldn't get started because of the way the bill was written. Nobody would qualify for licensure. So that was a repair, financial adjustments, things like that. But I'm not sure
Okay,
something this big, it would be unusual, unexpected, I would say, for something like this to go through on a short, right? I mean,
so your best guess is this, we won't see much on this until 27?
I would hope, because something that's this fraught, with this much overlapping authority, this many gray areas, this much emotion, and a vulnerable population on every level, if they took this on a short session, I would be surprised. I would be disappointed. But gosh,
Just don't know.
you just don't
They could be
know.
they could be in the back room at the Capitol working.
Yeah, working on it right now.
And trying to put what they think is the best solution together and drop it.
I know I haven't been given any heads up on anything that'll affect youth authority.
Well, let us know if you do, just so we can watch it along with you. But all I can say is keep your ear to the ground. And if something pops, don't be afraid to sign up to testify. Remember, if you can find out who the legislator is, who's carrying it, or the group, you can have your association ask to have a meeting with the legislator. You might only get 20 minutes. By God, have talking points, speaking bullets, and try to get in and weigh in if you can. I would be very surprised, but weirder things have happened. Especially since a lot of the old guard have retired or moved on. Courtney Kotek, when she was in charge of the House, Greenlick, Monis Anderson, Kenny Geyer, the old guard kind of kept the norms. Like, no, we don't take on giant issues in short session. We do fixes. Well, they're all gone now. And there's a certain amount of young Turkism that's just sort of taken off over there. So if they want to get something through, they just say, fine, I'm sure we can have plenty of conversations in a couple of weeks. So, yeah, so we'll see, but let us know. And we appreciate the robust conversation we really do. Anybody on the public line?
We need to read the public members.
No, there's nobody from the public on the phone.
Okay.
Did we read the script anyway, or no?
Yeah, we probably should just, because it's on the agenda, and just read it and then we'll adjourn.
We'll have to do other words.
Oh, yeah.
At this time, the sexual offense treatment board will hear public and interested parties' feedback. Public comment is limited to matters listed on the meeting agenda or topics relevant to what this board has statutory authority to regulate. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes and will not be allowed if they are disruptive to the board's conduct of its business. If you're called on to comment, the HLO staff will request the public member to unmute themselves. The chairperson and HLO reserve the right to end the person's comment early and have HLO staff mute the public member if the comment does not pertain to matters listed on the meeting agenda or topics relevant to what the board has statutory authority to relegate. Are there any members of the public who wish to comment? If so, raise your hand or use the MS Teams raise hand feature and wait to be acknowledged.
Doesn't appear to be any public on the call. So next item on the agenda is other board business.
And do you think, Suzanne, do you think that we will be able to look at the tiered fees by May?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Kenny's pretty quick.
So we can, look at the tier fee structure for the next one? Is there anything else you want on our to-do list, other than, obviously, we'll have known what came out of legislation? So we'll see what happens. I'll just put legislation on there, and if there's anything that affects you, or if you want to talk about, make me aware of something, I'll add it.
This is Bob. Moving back a step. So, John, you mentioned, in Eastern Oregon, our meeting that did about, is it county, when you said community? Is it the county that, assigns providers to children with problematic sexual behaviors?
This is John. The county designates who their mental health provider is. And so every county in Oregon has a designated mental health provider. And that's
Is that
the county,
just?
the county commissioner. And so whether there is a, like for a time in my county, there was Umatilla County Mental Health. And then they decided that it was too expensive to run it in-house, so they contracted to Lifeways for about 10 years. And it's been about 5 years that they've been contracted with Community Counseling Solutions. And so though they're the designated community mental health agency. And so and then it's up to that board and that entity to regulate their therapists, who is qualified, so one of the barriers I ran into, again, because of the carve out, is I thought, when I was trying to make a go of private practice, I thought, oh, I could contract with Community Counseling Solutions to provide sex offense specific treatment to people. And EOCCO and Community Counseling Solutions says, we don't need that. We've got people in-house that provide that.
CEO.
Eastern Oregon Coordinated Care Organization. They're the ones who oversee. Oh, thank you. They're the ones, I don't know how many of them there are around the state, but they're the ones who coordinate care for. Yes.
Are these self-referred, or are these usually kiddos that come out of an investigation from?
It could be any number. It could be mom sees, their child doing something, playing doctor with their friends, and they, oh, this is concerning, so I'm gonna call somebody to get help.
I see.
Or it's referred to because there's a child welfare investigation, and yes, and usually there has to be some designation that the parents are not providing adequate supervision and allowing this activity to go on. And if there's adequate supervision and parents are doing, in the eyes of the ODHS, their level best, then it gets closed. And maybe suggested that they refer to a
to counseling.
So, but this is Robbie English, and to clarify, we're talking about PSB in that, right? So for adjudicated youth, or youth within the juvenile justice system, there is, everyone understands that requirement is that you're certified in SOTB provider, certified provider. And so those youths that are over 12 are getting that service. Unfortunately, a lot of it is telehealth. But we are working actually with Higher Ground in the eastern region to try to develop additional providers and more services. So.
One other question, I'm sitting here, I'm filtering this. Do you think that the solution would be to develop a provider level to meet these kids where they are? Do you feel like they're falling in the gaps because everything has been established and then there's this new issue that's emerging, or have they always been ignored, or
This is the,
everyone's nodding?
yeah,
They asked like 9 questions.
I think that what's happened in the recent years is they've just like, someone's kind of lifted the rock, so to speak, and seeing this thing that's always existed, but is now shining a light.
So there's not more, it's just more recognition.
More recognition. I think
Okay.
these youth have always been, I think there's been many, I mean, just anecdotally, just that come to our clinic as 16-year-olds, you look back through their, their
The
intake.
signs are there.
And you're like, man, it's 7, 8, 9, there's CPS calls, and CPS referred them to just, Morrison, the big community mental health agency in town, and they gave them a child and family therapist to work with them on these issues. And so that was way more common, I think, years ago. These days, I think that there's more people that have been saying, hey, these youth are, they need specialized care. Like not anybody who says I work with kids can work or should work with these youth. So it's coming to light more. I don't think there's any more that they're used to necessarily.
Okay. Yeah, it's like, is autism getting worse, or are we just seeing it better? So once the lens is on, it's not new, we're just seeing it.
Right. And I think and Steven, again, what is happening is that like perhaps some of these youth under 12s who have for a long time just being serviced, I would say probably not super well in the community with providers with no specialty, just child therapists, are now being told partly by some of us that are SOTB certified, like, hey, wait a minute, we need to make sure that these youth are being seen by people that are specialized. And I think there's pushback. I mean, that's why I said within that report, I think there's some competing agendas, because I think that there's folks out there that are like, well, hey, wait, these kids have we've been seeing these kids for years.
Yeah, what's your issue now?
What's our issue? Why should they? And especially in light of the fact that we don't have the bandwidth with certified providers to actually work with them. And also one more thing is like, just because, I mean, for me personally, my career as a therapist has been working with teens, adjudicated youth. I've worked with a couple 12-year-olds, 11-year-olds, maybe. If there was an 8-year-old that I believe that there's there's steps that falls under the purview of the board that I could see, I wouldn't see them. I wouldn't see an 8-year-old. Like, that's out of my scope. Like, 8-year-old who has sexualized behavior issues is different than a 15-year-old. So that's another issue here, is that like, I'm not like, while it may seem like what we're saying is like, there's these child therapists that don't have specialized training and maybe shouldn't be seeing this 6 or 7-year-old. I'm saying with the right training and oversight, they should be. Those people probably would be the best. Should an adult a SOTB certified person who's only ever worked with adults are they more trained or more ethically, okay to see a sexual?
What's better, a child specialist without the training or an adult specialist with the training?
Right. It was like when I was a girl, when I was like in college, I had a scooter and I went for the motorcycle test and I had this 50cc scooter and.
Hey, I did great at my motorcycle test with my scooter. Don't be
I
sitting on
know,
the
and then
scooter.
they said they give you the
Yeah.
license, and you're like, you could just drive a 1200cc.
Yeah,
I know,
fire
I'm like,
breathing
now I
monster,
shouldn't be
no
doing
way.
that. So it's like that.
I get it. I
So-
do.
Anyway.
No, I get it. And if there was an easy answer, somebody would have found it by now.
Right.
Right? So we walk slow and we try to find our way.
Right, and we bring it up here, and this isn't the thing that's gonna solve the problem. I think that's part of becoming being like, man, we don't know what to do here. And it's a little like herding cats with our associations and within our associations, we can own we have an old guard too. That is status quo. They don't want to make waves. They're just kind of writing things out respectfully. And so we're trying to bring some of us who are seeing this being like, hey,
New energy.
the new energy of like, we need to do something about this. We're seeing this stuff in our clinics. We're seeing this. We're seeing the future a little bit. So why don't we do something now before we're really inundated and we really have a problem? And we're getting pushback from our own associations being like, no, let's let SOTB handle that. That's what SOTB is for. And then we're saying, okay, hold on. That's not what SOTB is for. Clarification. We've learned, and it's been helpful, that that's not the role. You know, you follow statute, you enforce those things. You don't come up with it. You don't have you're in Switzerland. So the associations have to, and that's been a huge push
That
for
way in
us.
so many
Hard.
professions,
Mhm.
they want to advocate, they want things. But wanting and doing are very different things, and doing hard stuff, right? So we're happy to talk it out with you. Like I said, we try to maintain the Switzerland thing. Because, you know, we don't want to see as advocates, another thing is, we don't want to be promoting professions. We don't want to be, you know, is it protectionism? Because we have this with some boards that want to regulate to make sure they get paid a certain amount or protect certain things, or we don't want you coming and, you know, offering your services. We want to be, you know, so we're always watching those things to make sure that you guys don't get into dangerous areas. But I completely understand it. If you want to come and hash it out in any capacity, we're happy to listen and game it out with you, but we may not be able to do it. In our capacity, we may not be able to do anything. But it's nice to know it's out there and also helping me learn so I can watch for you for certain things. So it's certainly helpful. Hi.
One of the things, this is John, one of the things I found interesting is in one of the appendices, it talks about the barriers that they're gonna have to overcome to implement these things. And the two that jumped out at me was, one, it's too hard. And the other one was that, you know, overcoming stigma in the rural counties.
Not wanting to label kids a sexual problem. I saw that one and said, anything we can do, if this kiddo is being seen by a sexual offense specialist, oh my God, my kid's a sex offender.
Right.
And it's like anything we could do to not create that record, you know, and again, the push-pull of getting them the help they need without labeling them a predator.
Right.
My 6-year-old's not a predator, you know, and so I saw that too.
Again, this is John, again, this case that I referred to about the 12-year-old boy in Umatilla County. It ended up being a part of the marital, you know, the marriage broke up. And there was a family court procedure, and they wanted the judge to order that this child get sex offense treatment. And the judge, and I argued against this so bad because again, and the judge ended up ordering that the kid set for a psychosexual evaluation. And I've met with the person who did that psychosexual evaluation, and he is like shaking his head going, they don't know what they're asking us to do. They are labeling this kid and it's going to come back to bite them. And this kid, he's on the spectrum. He's a lovely little boy and he just needs to learn. And I'm worried about it.
Well, you all care so much, and that's what makes this work, I want to say fun for me, but you're so engaged and you care so much. And it's easier to deal with strong emotions than apathy. You know, the boards that just sit there and go, well, what are you gonna do? That one's a little harder, you know, but you guys are deeply passionate about what you do. We appreciate that. We appreciate the time you spend with us.
Yeah. Understand the discussion, helping us
Yeah,
understand.
we appreciate you.
Oh, I feel like we're like the parent that always says no, you know, but we try with the tools that we have to be Switzerland and also be effective. And you know, we don't always like what we get, but again, we're not allowed to have feelings about it. We just have to do what we do. But again, if you have questions, I gave you all my card.
Thank you.
You want to talk about something, you're not sure what to do, I'm happy to try to game it out and play the Google game with you. You know, we can negotiate the termite mound and VHS together. I mean, whatever you need, just let me know, because I'm your hands. I'm here to help, so. Fantastic. This is a fantastic meeting.
It's like we call them lost all the staff.
Last us.
And I'm getting texts from my staff, are we gonna have lunch?
Well, it used to be, so many of my boards meet on Fridays. We used to, cater lunch, but then COVID ruined everything, so.
Amen.
But if everybody enjoyed lunch and promptly stopped working afterwards. We just watched people nod out. I mean, the deep nod of cold cuts, right? We say,
We
okay.
tried to get lunch here as early as we could.
Anyway, thank you all so very much. Questions, things you want to add to the agenda? Give me a call.
Thanks.
And,
We lost Karen, we lost Shannon.
yeah, Karen, don't sign off yet.
Okay, so we have to adjourn the meeting. Quick, first, anyone else again?
The Sexual Offense Treatment Board meeting is adjourned at 12:12 p.m.
Thank you so much.